Good afternoon.
What I mean, yeah, just,
I'm going to call the Airport Master Plan Advisory Committee meeting to order at 5:30. This is our third meeting at our
Mike,
first,
maybe you can move the mic to,
sorry. It's our third meeting. At the first couple of meetings, we talked about an inventory at the airport, and then we did a forecast. And at this meeting, our primary focus is going to be on facility requirements. So with that, I'll entertain a motion for approval of the minutes.
I'll move approval.
Okay. And they were extensive, by the way, so very detailed. Probably won't see those again. So you moved?
Yep.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Second? Okay. Discussion or any other corrections?
Yes, I have some. So I don't know, Mark, which page to refer to, because it's 7, 8, and page 7 of 30 are all on the bottom of the minutes.
Can't hear you guys.
Okay, so we got to get the right page. So you got 8?
No.
so the one that says
Same
7.
7, 8, and
Yeah, I
7
got
of
it.
30. I don't, which is the
Okay.
right page number? Is it
Okay.
8?
It's, one of them was automatic, one of them is a Word document, the other one is generated by the packet. So 7, 8, I get it, I know which one you mean.
Yep, page 7 of 30.
30, okay.
Yep.
Okay, he's working on my microphone. So, on the very bottom, it says, Richardson stated that the town of Middleton has looked into the possibility of incorporation to protect the town's interests, but their attorney has advised that this would reduce the city's legal authority with respect to the airport. Are you okay? Yep. Get his head. That was in, I didn't rewatch the tape, but my recollection is that was in the context of the public town board meeting for town of Middleton on June 13 of 2019. So otherwise it looks like I'm telling you the private advice of our town attorney, of attorney-client privilege. So if I could have something added to say that was in the context, because you had attended that, Mark?
Okay, I understand what you're getting at.
And it was in, with respect to, it was a brief discussion at our town board meeting, and it was with respect to, under Wisconsin statute, chapter 114. So if you could just add that for context.
All right, what language would you like me to add? So it's under, wouldn't reduce the city's legal authority with respect to the
Well,
airport.
no, so you could say, Richardson stated, at, you know, I don't know if I said the date, I mean, obviously you want it to be correct, but I'm referring to the June 13, 2019 public town board meeting. So this was discussed in the open, with respect to Wisconsin statutes, chapter 114. And then the rest is fine. Oh, I'm sorry. Testing, 1, 2, 3, testing, can you hear?
Either that or feedback. I can't go anywhere between.
I did review the tape, Cynthia, so I'm sorry if I didn't capture that correctly, but I
Yeah,
took
no,
that
and
based
that's
on.
okay, it's just I think I was responding to your comment about it, but regardless, I didn't rewatch the tape. Otherwise, it just looks like I'm revealing attorney-client privileged information, and I'm not, it was all in a public meeting.
Okay. It's possible that that was in response to me. You know, as I wrote these minutes, I struggled with saying, you know, do I have the person who asked the question and then an answer? And I was trying to keep it
Oh, of course, these were
dense,
difficult
so-
to take. One other question I have, in some places, the complete address of people who spoke in the audience are given, and then in other places, they're missing or very, very vague. I guess I would ask that we just adopt one standard of people's addresses, so you don't have some people having their privacy completely invaded and others not. It just seems inconsistent.
Agreed?
Pardon?
Agreed.
Oh,
I went by what was either given or if I could find information. How does the town board handle registrants?
we actually look it up on Access Dane.
So you do provide address information, though?
Not always, but if it's something where we really want a very good record so that I'd have to contact people again.
I'll do whatever you prefer.
Well, I think it was in response to Alderman West's request, because I didn't think that we needed that. I could just say Town of Middleton, Town of Springfield, City of Middleton. I mean, I don't know how the rest of the,
Happy to do whatever. If you you know, this isn't a formal hearing, we're allowing public comment, and I thought, you know, at one point, I think I had to identify someone as probably a Hickory Woods resident, if I
Right,
remember
a
right.
lady who probably lives in Hickory Woods.
Yeah, because of the context,
Right.
you know, I didn't have any more information, so, if you wish to have public comment and people identify themselves and maybe the community they're from, you know, that's fine with me,
I think that'd be easier on you.
absolutely.
Let's do that.
Okay. But you're not asking me to make changes in these minutes now?
No, it's fine.
Okay.
Other?
This is both of ours.
Any other comments?
I'm just trying to figure it out.
Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
I'll abstain because I wasn't here.
Okay,
Thank you.
that sounds good, Jim.
Maybe you should introduce yourself too.
Okay.
All right,
Have everyone-
well, why don't we just go around?
Okay.
Go ahead.
Bob Bartholomew.
Jim Polvemacher from the town of Springfield.
Ray Fay from Middleton.
Mike Frank, representing the Middleton Chamber of Commerce.
Jade Hofelt from Capital Flight at the Middleton Airport.
Leaf Hubbard, Middleton.
Cynthia Richardson, Town of Middleton.
I'm Julie Leffler. I'm the citizen representative from the town of Springfield.
Richard Morey. I operate Morey Airplane Company and am the airport manager at the Middleton Municipal Airport, Morey Field.
Kevin Munson, Middleton.
Deanna Porter representing Middleton Area Development Corporation.
And Mark Warshaw representing Friends of Pheasant Branch Conservancy.
Okay, thank you. We will move on to review and follow-up of items from the June 6th meeting. Are there any?
Yep,
Yeah, go ahead.
sure. We have a couple
Oh.
staff remarks, if that's,
Sure, go ahead. Go
Oh,
ahead,
okay.
Mark.
yeah, just go up there. So a few items came up at the previous meeting, and I've responded to them either by email or by posting information on the website and letting you know about it, or by putting something at your places. The first item was the aircraft characteristics. That's in page 32 of your packet. Mead and Hunt provided us with that information, and that's, as I mentioned, in page 32. There had been requests for more information about the user survey results, both the survey that was done of the existing users, and I posted a summary of that, as well as recently Cynthia had requested additional information of the Flong version, which you could access if you had a Polco account. But what we did is I had asked Mead and Hunt to just tabulate all those using his account, and we uploaded those to the website. And then there's the results of the potential users, also available on our website. You had asked for staff guidance on opportunities for more public input. We had discussed this amongst ourselves and with the chairperson. We decided that the current process has been working quite well, with the modification made at the last meeting to allow public comment after every item. We had, of course, the open house at Cromrie. The city has been sending information out on its listserv and posting on the website, as has the town listserv and website. We have updated the schedule to add another meeting of the AMPAC in November. You'll find out more about that later. And we have said all along that we plan to have and are committed to having a public hearing upon completion of the draft, at least one hearing. And then I would add, we've talked about this before as well, that the city has always planned to do a community survey. I have sent information out about that, but I do want to emphasize again tonight that we are committed to working with this group and adjoining officials from adjoining communities, as well as the author of the private survey, to develop a comprehensive community survey that will be, later this fall, I would imagine, or whatever is the appropriate time when the draft is completed or nearing completion.
Okay,
And then Greg has some comments too.
okay.
I think Mark captured it pretty well. I was reviewing the meeting minutes he put together, and there was some other things that came out. The emergency response, I believe, was a question that had come up, and Mark had reached out to the police and I believe the fire department as well, and I think the fire department just responded today, right? Just
Yeah.
recently.
And that information is at your places. I meant to cover that, and I forgot. It's, I think, the white sheet of paper
That's from the fire department, or fire district.
and police, they're both on there.
Right. Yep.
One comment that came out of the meeting last time too, and I think Cynthia, you had asked us as we move into looking at land use, one of the questions you had is looking at congested nature of land, and wanted to acknowledge that that is something that we've heard, and when we move into that part of it, we'll be, and I'm not really familiar with that myself, honestly, what the FA defines as congested, so I plan to dive into that a little deeper and adjust that comment when we get into that.
When do you think that will be, Greg?
Our next steps are moving into alternatives analysis, and then once we have kind of a more refined alternative in place, I think we'd want to be then looking at land use relative to that. So I would think that would be following the alternatives analysis. And in conjunction with land use, we'd be looking at noise as well, kind of at the same time. One of the other comments we got from the public, and Mark acknowledged that, there was a community survey that was put in place, and we were asked, are we going to be looking at that? And we have since received a copy of that and have had a chance to look at it. So we plan to acknowledge that and see what's been said in that, and take that into advisement as we move forward. And then one of the other
That's the one done by the citizens, right?
Right, yep. And then one of the last questions that came out of the last public meeting is some sort of idea on what the largest aircraft we're envisioning. And we're hoping to talk a little bit about that more today as part of the analysis and try to get a better sense of where we see that fitting in here. So,
Okay.
yep.
I have a sort of a functional question. So what we have been seeing, the draft documents, is that the draft plan that will be given to the airport commission and subsequently to the city council to review, or is this, so, for example, if we would like something, or we feel that something should be added to this document, will that be done, or is that sort of left to discretion on behalf of you? And for example, this on fire suppression and that sort of thing, something like that should be added to the plan.
Yeah.
And that maybe definition of Class A suppression systems and Class B flammable. I'm not sure if aviation fuel falls into that, how you put that out.
Right, yeah. No, those are good points, and yeah, I think the whole idea of calling them draft is that, we want to present them as a first cut and get feedback from you folks, and if there's things that we feel we need to supplement or add or clarify, absolutely, that's, yep.
Okay.
Julie, I know you had a question.
Yeah, I did have a comment now that I've had a chance to review this, this single sheet from the police chief and the chief of the Middleton Fire District. I just want to supplement what the chief of the Middleton Fire District said was something that was relayed to me by one of the firefighters who responded to the flooding that occurred at the airport resulting in spilled fuel. He came up to me at the open house. I did not approach him. He approached me. He knows me slightly because we're neighbors, and he said, I am very concerned about whether or not we would have had enough firefighters there to immediately handle a fuel spill, and I just want to put that out as an alternative viewpoint. I'm just not sure that that 1-2 paragraph note completely covers it, and I don't know where to go for that. I just want to put it on the record that he approached me, and that is what he told me, that he's very concerned about it. There's no union. I know these are volunteer firefighters. I just thought maybe there was a way to get an alternative viewpoint in there.
Okay. Cindy?
All right, I've just got a couple things. So first of all, I just think it would be helpful, I know, Mark, it's great you put it on the City of Middleton website, but just by way of background so everybody can be on the same page, the 1998 resolution, which was the City Council's statement of intent for Maury Airport property, basically made a promise to the citizens of restricting the runway length for the primary runway to 4,000 feet, The city does not support the construction of a crosswind runway, and the city continues to urge pilots to follow flight patterns over commercial and industrial areas and away from residential areas. And the city will welcome further input if there is a need to make an improvement in the future. And at a minimum, we'll hold at least one public hearing on the proposed improvements. So that's 1998. That was actually December 15 of 1998. And several months later, in April of 1999, it went to referendum. And the reason it went to referendum is in 1998, a group of citizens that formed a group called the Citizens for Responsible Growth obtained enough signatures on a petition to request the city of Middleton to submit an advisory referendum to voters, which would simply have asked, do you want the city of Middleton to purchase the Maury Airport or not? And by law, the city was not required to act on this request because it was advisory in nature, and the city then chose not to act. So the citizens group had no other option but to file suit and litigate the matter. And that's how we wound up with what ultimately went to vote in April of 1999, the referendum, with the extremely confusing language where it appears that a yes means a no and a no means a yes vote. But the end result is that the charter that the citizens had to, that was the only legal avenue left, to prohibit future development at the airport was defeated, undoubtedly due to voter confusion at the ballot box. And then again in 2014, another city council resolution that basically is the basis, I believe, from looking at the record, that that's how the city has been applying to the Bureau of Aeronautics for airport improvement monies, and includes prepare a master plan and environmental assessment. So, Mark, hopefully that's accurate in your opinion.
I think there's a problem with that. The undoubtedly portion, the wording for that referendum was by the Citizens for Responsible Growth. So any confusion about it was their doing.
So actually, according to the lawyer who is involved with the citizens, that's not correct. So that's fine if that's your understanding, but that's not correct on the record.
It's still in my mind, and I was here, and I lived, and I voted on the resolution. I can't remember what I voted, but still, undoubtedly is rather speculative, and I mean, you don't know really what was in the heads of the people back in 1999.
I actually lived in the city of Middleton at that time as well, and it was confusing, but that's my own personal
Yeah.
opinion.
Okay.
All right, the other thing I want to do is, we were talking about vision at the last meeting. What is the city's vision for the airport? And in the April 25, 2016 Airport Commission meeting packet, there is language that was in the comprehensive plan for the city of Middleton transportation element, which is where the airport would go, that had been deleted. And I am asking that it be returned to the current draft of the city's comprehensive plan transportation element. And this is the part that I think it's very important that it be reinserted into the current draft. So it says, in the coming years, the city will need to continue to monitor airport operations to ensure the facility is operating as safely and efficiently as possible. Totally agree. That was stricken though. And then while at the same time minimizing potentially negative impacts on nearby properties. I think that is critical language that needs to be replaced in the current City of Middleton Comprehensive Plan transportation element. And when I looked at what's available on the city's website, so the current draft language for the comprehensive plan transportation element dated April 26, 2019, it's item number 12, and it's quite different. So I think this does indicate the vision of the city. Continue to plan for and operate the municipal airport in a manner that supports regional economic development, maximizes financial self-sufficiency, and serves as an attractive gateway to the community, et cetera, and also talks about the BOA doing an updated economic impact study, which is in process right now, I understand. And I would ask, we're on our third of 4 scheduled meetings, that we not adjourn or take any votes at this committee until we have a meeting devoted to the revised economic impact study so we can understand its contents. But the regional part of this is very concerning because I talked to some of the regional bodies in the area. There's 3 of them, is my understanding, that applies to the transportation piece. and they've told me that that would exceed the city's authority. So, for what that's worth. And then the last thing is, I have a question and then I have a comment. In looking at the minutes of various City of Middleton bodies, on March 19, 2019, Matt Hofeld, who is the president of Capital Flight at Maury Airport, was added as a 9th member of this body. So is he still a member of this body?
No.
Okay, because there's nothing in the minutes saying that he was taken off, because Jade Hofeld, his wife, is on this body, and she was appointed with Deanna Porter on behalf of the Middleton Area Development Corporation and Rich Morey on behalf of Morey Airplane Company, the fixed-based operator at Morey Airport, on April 16 of 2019, and there's nothing saying that Jade is being put on here instead of Matt. So are they both on here?
I'd like a full explanation.
Sure. I think the intent, you said that was March 19th was the date?
Yes.
So at the time, Matt had applied, but as I understood from talking with the mayor, when there was a request by, I think Springfield requested another member. There were a couple other requests for additions, and the mayor at the time, and I don't know if he is here, decided to appoint Jade instead of Matt. And so that, I didn't realize Matt had been formally appointed on March 19th.
Right, and not only had he been appointed, because I thought maybe I mistook it, but then again on April 2 of 2019, there is a memo on page 132 saying that in order to complement the addition of Matt Holfeld made by the council at the meeting of March 19, blah, blah, blah. So I think the record should be corrected, just so we know who's on this technically. And then that leads me to my final point, and then I'm done. So the composition of this advisory committee is interesting. Robust debate, different viewpoints is always welcomed, but there's a concept in the law called conflicts of interest. And when you have a direct financial stake in something, you have divided loyalties. And so this is a very serious issue that's going to affect a lot of people, even beyond the city of Middleton. And I would like to make a motion that Rich Morey of Morey Airplane Company, who is a for-profit business, and no, nothing personal, but you are at Morey Airport. Jade Hofeld, who is the CEO of Capital Flight LLC, a specialized operator with a contract, who for-profit, nothing against you, that's great, but making their living off of Morey Airport. And Deanna Porter, who was appointed as a representative of the Middleton Area Development Corporation, a private group. She's also the treasurer on the board of directors of the Chamber of Commerce, commercial real estate consulting, again, nothing personal, but the Middleton Area Development Corporation owns the airport terminal at Morey Airport with a direct financial stake in it. And I don't know if there's a mortgage on the property yet, but you receive monthly rental payments of approximately $5,000, I believe.
That is correct.
So perhaps I would like to make a motion that those three members not be allowed to vote on anything after.
So can I just comment?
I don't think
This
that
is simply
we're at a point
an
where we're going to take motions.
Yeah.
I think these individuals can remove themselves if there is a conflict of interest.
And this is
We
nothing,
do-
nothing being said by this
You
committee
can have
is
their input
binding.
without their binding vote. And there was a second on my motion by Julie Loeffler, for the record, please.
I've seconded that motion because I think we need to have that fully established in advance. And that's why I'm seconding it. We need a procedure for this. And
There is a procedure, I believe.
I don't think there is. Let's hear it if there is. If you know it, then explain it to me.
This is an advisory board. It has no authority whatsoever. So whatever Rich and Jade come up with, it's the airport commission that has to come up with it. So nothing
I
that we come up
understand,
with.
excuse me, I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
And I respect what you're saying, that we are an advisory committee. However, what comes out of this committee will go to the airport commission and then either to the planning commission or to the city council. So I think that,
And-
excuse me, I do think that it is important that we have a procedure for people to take a vote and decide if we can have a procedure whereby people, when they have a financial interest, step back from taking a vote on something that is going to impact their livelihoods and the the financial well-being of their corporations or their companies or their nonprofit city entity, whatever whatever the Middleton Development Corporation is. I'd like to explore this, and I'd like to hear more about it, and that's why I'm seconding this motion. I don't
Thank
know
you.
a lot about it, but I
Thank you
am
for your
seconding
second.
it.
Thank you. Mark?
There's been an interest in following Robert's Rules of Order. This item, the motion, is not listed under this agenda item, and this was not a topic discussed at the previous meeting, so as chairman, you need to decide whether to accept this as a motion that's properly before the body.
It is not.
And I'm gonna make a specific request that this be on the next meeting of this advisory committee's agenda, specifically conflicts of interest, please.
I agree.
So noted. All right. We are working on review and follow-up of items from June 6th meeting, which I don't think that was.
I do have a question before you go on. I thought the purpose of having follow-up was to actually have a discussion about the follow-up, but you're saying now that that's foreclosed by Robert's Rules of Orders?
No.
So what is foreclosed by Robert's Rules of Orders in this? That there's nothing in it that says you can entertain a motion at this time? Is what you just said, right? Is that correct? You said there's nothing.
Follow-up
that
for items that were from the June 6th meeting, and I don't recall the composition of the board, of the advisory committee being something that was discussed at the June 6th meeting.
Well,
And
we-
furthermore,
Ian
this-
Hunt is controlling, and you are controlling the agenda and the chair, so we have no ability to, I'm
Okay,
asking that this
but-
be on the agenda for the next meeting then.
The point is, it wasn't, so it's not germane to this item. So,
Can I ask a question? Is there no reason, though, that it couldn't be added to a future agenda item? I can understand why you don't want to do it tonight, because it isn't a posted agenda
Correct.
item, but there's no reason why it couldn't be posted for a future agenda item,
could
correct?
be.
If we were being really strict about Robert's Rules of Order, that Chair Pulvermacher has not been appointed either. But obviously, we're happy to have him
gonna
here,
be
and yeah, it's delighted that, we're great that he's here. This is an advisory body.
Wait a minute, isn't he taking Dan Drazen's place for tonight, or is he permanently taking his place? Did I miss something here?
I'm just here for tonight.
You're substituting for Dan Drazen?
Right.
Right, but the council had formally appointed specific individuals, but nobody, I think it's great that he's here filling in for Dan. I mean, this is an advisory committee.
So is
not
he gonna be
making a
allowed to take a
motion.
vote, though, on all of our motions?
I've already recorded that.
Okay.
I'm not making a motion. My question is there any reason why you cannot request and add it to the next agenda item? I'm not making.
I've already recorded that as an agenda
As a
item for next
request.
time, sure.
That's what
Yeah.
that was my question. Thank you.
Thanks,
sir.
Jim.
Thank you.
Okay. We will move on to item 2, which is the focus of this meeting. And with that, we'll review the Chapter 3 facility requirements. And I think Greg has a presentation together for us.
Yeah, well, your patience here, my laptop is disconnected.
Okay. And of course, this is kind of in lockstep with what our earlier inventory and forecast was. And this is just the next logical step in the master plan process.
Fell asleep or?
It's great when it works.
Technology. Chinese knock out the satellites, we'll be stuck, right?
The lowest form of technology, put the man on
That's true.
the upper grade.
Yeah.
As they say,
Get a bigger hammer.
It's just not working?
as they say,
Did you do this?
inside the Saturn V.
That has more computing processing than all the computers at NASA at the time.
Should we start? No, I don't. Let me just see if I can. So, you didn't have to log into the Wi-Fi at all, so it's just. things aren't responding. Well, it's on the web too, right? Could try that, right?
Voting on the conflicts issue on the dead time.
And it captured quite well.
Had a lot of technology problems in this room before. If you want, I can try and.
I appreciate your folks' patience here. I'm gonna just try to restart the whole thing.
Let her know.
It was working at the beginning.
We could just talk our way through it.
Middleton, should identify myself, but I live over Middleton Hill, which is over here.
Yeah, you wanna put that?
Everyone can see it.
I wonder if we should add this.
It'll be
afterwards. Oh,
very
yeah.
hard for the public.
Let's see. I have some printouts here, just in case our
Geometry and printed it out myself.
electronics go down.
It's a continual eye.
Yeah, I think Rich Maury was an IT guy in school.
Financial gain.
He was. Well, I asked him to come over and do it.
When was he chopped?
I did. Sure he was. Had all our nerds that
Oh, isn't he?
could only touch the projector.
Should try it.
She spoke two ways, she said.
The AV people in school.
I'm surprised. Certified.
City council had actually forced the mayor's hand into someone from Capitol fly down to the, onto this committee. That's what, for what school?
Middleton.
Oh, it is,
Class
okay.
74.
Oh,
Some really there
that explains its growth.
just as a lawyer, I'm gonna tell you, I think but I
I'll
don't
do some of it.
specifics.
All the phases of Bishop, the early phases of Bishop's Bay.
Oh, did, okay, you're a contractor then?
It was.
Oh, yeah.
We're almost there, I think.
You've seen a lot of growth in the city then.
I've done a lot of growth on a key, all the areas.
See, they're
I don't
all
know.
growing nuts. They're all growing so fast. I got
Mayor
my
Joe
kid.
Chase from some
I know.
There we go.
There you go.
credit it when he left.
Wait till
Kids don't want it.
I'll be sitting here no matter what, either a sit
Thank you so much for your patience. I apologize. I'll just move to the slide here. Before we get started, I just want to again thank you folks for your time and your commitment and your involvement in this process. As Leaf had reiterated, we are on our third chapter of the master plan. The first chapter was the inventory of the existing facilities at the airport. The second chapter that we had talked about at last month's meeting was on the forecasts, where we see activity occurring and growing at the airport over the 5, 10, and 20-year horizon. We are now at the point where, in consideration of those forecasts, we are looking at facility requirements. And this is an outline of the chapter that we intend to touch on tonight. One of the biggest items we're going to spend most of the discussion on is the primary runway length. And we're going to look at that from a number of viewpoints. We're going to look at what the FAA provides for guidance on determining appropriate runway length for an airport. We are going to look at how the airport sits in the overall statewide system plan, its role and its classification in the Wisconsin State Airport System Plan. And then we're also going to look at how this airport compares to other airports. And what we've heard from folks from the advisory committee and folks from the public is a desire and a concern to not really change the type of aircraft that are utilizing this facility. And we've done an exercise in looking at other similar airports to try to find that tipping point in terms of runway length where larger aircraft could come onto the scene. And so we want to kind of go through that analysis to try to give some sense of where we see that, something larger than B2, which is the current design critical aircraft at the airport, where that point is, and we don't want to go beyond that point. And so we're going to touch on that. And then lastly, we're going to touch on, the feedback that we've got from the users and also the feedback that we've got from the community and the public. And we know that all that has to be factored into what runway length makes sense here in the future. So,
Greg, before we
Yep.
get any further, about 2 slides back before this one, future meetings or further meetings was on the agenda. Can we just talk about what our schedule's gonna be? Because this is the 3rd of 4 scheduled meetings. Are we just having one more meeting, and can we talk about that before we get into the substance?
we can, that was a later item. I'll jump to that.
You're going the wrong way, I think.
No, because it's at the end,
No, it's right here.
right? But
In his discussion,
I
it's,
think
Oh.
it was the last slide. So,
we're,
this is the schedule, and again, we have been trying to
1, 2, 3.
listen to the concerns of the advisory committee and make sure that we're providing enough time for comment, feedback. But what the schedule is showing is that we're here in July. We're in our 3rd advisory committee meeting. The next step would be the alternatives analysis, where we would like to present concepts. And I think that's what a lot of people are really interested in, is what ideas do you have? What does it look like? And that will be the next meeting, is the concepts, the drawings, and looking at the pros and cons of each alternative.
So that's in
Yep.
September.
Yeah, and what we'd like to do is, have time in late July and August to develop those drawings, to develop those concepts, and then also to get them to you folks so you've got time to review them. So we're looking at mid-September. I think September 26th was a date that we thought might give enough time for us to develop those alternatives and you folks to review them.
Well, before you
Could
get to
I, Jeff,
alternatives,
go ahead?
shouldn't there be some other information collected? Got the economic impact, for example, public health such as groundwater pollution, safety, the effect of noise on people, wildlife. I think if you're developing a 20-year plan, before you do any sketches or plans, shouldn't all that information go into development of those plans?
Yeah,
I
and
think that holding off on any plans until we've got all that data, and then go from there as far as the plans that fit what the requirements were.
I think when Greg gets working through the actual presentation, some of this will become clearer. I think we're just basically now talking about the schedule.
Yeah, well, this will be the schedule, though, that we should have meetings that specifically address those issues. In fact, they're such important issues, a separate meeting on economic impact, public health, noise, those should all be separate meetings.
I agree, because you know what? We are drawing plans and making sketches, and we haven't addressed what most of the people in this room are here for. And as I'm a representative of the residents of Springfield, I know what they're interested in, and it's not seeing plans and sketches. And indeed, in this schedule, which I looked at very carefully before I came here, it does say that you're going to get into noise and land use, and I don't know what that means, and financial documentation, I don't know what that means, in August. Originally, in your original schedule, it was set for getting going much earlier. I understand it's apparently been revised. It was supposed to be those things were supposed to be starting in April and I think June, if I'm reading the thing that was distributed to us at our first meeting. But I myself have to agree with what Professor Bartholomew is saying. I think these are very important issues to the people that I was appointed to represent.
And we were told there's no rush. So I don't know we have cutoff dates for these various things. I think we have to collect, assimilate, discuss all that information, again, separate topic, because they bear on a 20-year plan. They have a major impact upon the people around here, not just the airport, and will be growth between now and 20 years. It's going to impact them too. So I suggest we slow down, have those meetings, and I don't care if it goes into 2020. Is there a deadline we have to meet? That it's a 20-year plan after all.
no, and in response to Julie's comment about the schedule changing, I mean.
I can make that into a motion, actually. if
We've
you
heard that, and that's a big reason why. I mean, we've tried to
Why don't you do that?
be
Okay.
flexible, add more meetings, and that all has impacts to the schedule.
Before you do the motion, May I add something?
Oh, yeah, sure.
So this is my fourth time doing master plans. I realize I may be a masochist, but there's sort of two types. There's the type of master plan where there's no significant change. There's type of master plans where there's proposed significant changes, such as new runways, extending runways, et cetera. So the master plans where there's not a lot of significant changes are relatively easy to get through. I mean, none of them are easy to get through, but they're easier to get through than master plans where there's significant changes. And the environment has changed significantly, the airport development environment in the last 20 years. There's last 20 and 30 years, there's a lot more focus on comprehensive land use plans. There's a lot more focus on what's called safety compatibility zones, and I'm not talking Part 77, safety to air navigation. I'm talking about safety to groundlings and building safety zones around the airport.
Groundlings?
Groundlings, like people on the ground.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Groundlings.
So there's the
Like
Part
humans.
77, safety to air navigation, and there's safety compatibility zones, which the Wisconsin Airport Planning Handbook, Land Use Plan Handbook, or whatever it's called, it does touch on this. It touches on, in fact, some of my data is in there. I saw that from my thesis that I did on this decades ago. So, we as pilots, users of the airport, planners of the airport, we have a credo. We have a saying that we can't make good decisions unless we are familiar with, the data is available and we're familiar with that data. And right now, I know, Greg, you and I have met a few times on this over the past year or so. We don't have a comprehensive land use plan, and we haven't looked at these airport safety compatibility zones. And we do have one, that crosswind turf runway that pushes very close to Highwood Court, is Highwood Circle.
Highwood Circle Estates.
And we're looking at maybe pushing that even closer, and we really need to, in this environment, it's very much different than it was 20 or 30 years ago, in this environment, have available all information so we can make an educated recommendation. And where I am right now, I can't do that. I don't have all available data. I'm not familiar with it. It's not available for me to make a decision. And based on the data that I have, I don't really think that we're looking at the recommendations for the ALP as compatible land use. Now, that's just my personal opinion. I think we need more data. I can't even make a recommendation at this time. I mean, we could make a motion to continue on with the master plan, to leave, if any significant changes status quo on Chapter 3 or the ALP, and move on and continue on with this process, because I realize it's expensive and we need to keep moving on. But that's just my 2 cents.
Excuse me, but I am a little bit confused by what you're saying, Kevin. I don't quite understand it. I thought that and the only reason I agreed to serve on this committee is that we were going to take a planning stance that allowed us to gather information. I think that what Professor Bartholomew is saying is that we have a lot of information gathering that is outside of the scope of the sort of things that you're talking about. And there's not a huge amount of space being given to that, where there is a huge amount of space being given to facilities needs and facility planning. He's just suggesting, and I happen to think that if he makes a motion, I may very well second it, because I understand that those are the things that people who live in the area and people who live in the city even are concerned about. And I relied on what the City of Middleton staff and the representatives of the government who appointed me from the City of Middleton, that we would take it and look at everything very thoroughly. We would take the time to do that, and that there was no option that was written in stone. And I have heard that many times publicly and privately. So I'm not really sure why everybody's concerned about taking a step back and taking time to examine issues that are really important to people, and really getting some information out and talking it over with residents. I just don't understand you mentioned the expense of it. I understand it might be an expense for the city of Middleton to be slowing down this process, but it's nothing compared to the expense that a lot of people are gonna undergo if they lose a huge amount of property value or if their homes become unlivable to them. So I have to say, if I'm understanding you correctly, I can't 100% agree with what you're saying. I think we should take the time to examine
No,
issues
well,
that are greatly of
I think
concern.
we're saying the same thing
Okay.
here.
That's fine.
And can I just say, Greg, so like on page 53, when I was reading these materials, it's saying the runway 119, is that the crosswind runway?
Yes.
Okay, so it says, are located near the edge of airport property. Both of the runway protection zones to this runway are primarily situated off of airport property. As the area of the north of the airport is largely unoccupied, the runway 19 runway protection zone is located over agricultural fields. However, to the south, the runway 01 runway protection zone is positioned over the intersection of Airport Road and Deming Way, in addition to the businesses located there. And one of the things that we're supposed to discuss is making this even longer. So
Okay,
is that gonna go right into
just
businesses?
Hold it.
I mean, I'm really,
No,
this
wait,
is
stop.
interesting.
Cynthia, please hold that question until we get to that in the plan. We're talking about the schedule here, folks.
So you're on
okay?
item 3 or you're on item 2? That's what
We're on item 3. We're talking about this,
You're on facility requirements and people.
we're on item 2.
Well, I was about to
Okay.
make a motion, though.
So,
On
And
item
about the
3 or on
scheduling,
item 2?
which
That's
is
where
what
I'm
we're
On the
confused.
schedule. On the schedule.
okay, that'll be item 3, the next steps.
Okay, fine.
Okay, so let's wait
Hold
till we
on
get to
then.
there. Let's work through,
Yeah, and I think I can touch on your question about the crosswind runway and the RPZs.
Thank you.
Yeah, and, but I guess I'm a little confused on what we want to do. Want to talk more about the schedule or get back to the,
We're on facility requirements. is what
let's stay with the facility requirements.
okay.
I thought that we had agreed to talk about the schedule. You had mentioned that, too.
I think people here are
Okay.
very interested in what the schedule
Okay.
is.
Sure.
And we'll talk about the schedule when it comes to the next steps, schedule, item 3, okay? Okay? So right now, let's talk about item 2, the facility requirements.
Okay, so I think we were trying to outline some of the things that we were addressing in Chapter 3. And we touched a little bit on the primary runway length and the 4 methods that we have looked at in determining what runway length makes sense or is possible here, with the understanding that we need to also factor in the community's voice and the community's interests. We will talk about the crosswind runway, and Cynthia, you brought up an interesting question about the RPZs, and we'll talk a little bit about more of the FAA's current emphasis on RPZs. That was not the case 10 years ago, and I'll be happy to explain how that ended up being the way it is. But we'll also talk about, what makes sense for that turf runway. Is it best to leave that as a turf runway? There are some advantages of paving that in that we can take some of that traffic in a more north-south direction, and we'll talk a little bit about some of the advantages of paving that and reorienting that and shifting it back to help some of those RPZs that encroach onto roadways. We're going to touch a little bit on the instrument approaches, the approach capabilities of the runway, and want to talk a little bit about the constrained nature of this airport, really limiting the future of some of those approaches. Given how close some of the hangars and buildings and roadways are to the runway, there's a limit to what approaches can really feasibly be developed for the runway 1028. And we want to talk about that, make sure there's an understanding, because that'll set some limits on the future of the runway. And then lastly, we want to touch on hangar demand, and we know that there's a long waiting list and that there's an interest in more hangars being built, no place to put them, and we're going to touch on those requirements. So with that overview, I'm going to get right into the runway length determination process. And what I want to start with is the FAA's guidance on determining appropriate runway length. And this comes out of an advisory circular. It's Advisory Circular 5325-4B. It's named Runway Length Requirements for Airport Design. And there's a step-by-step process when you follow that advisory circular for laying out what runway length makes sense. And step one of that is really determining what your critical aircraft are on the airport. And right now we know that the largest aircraft or the most critical aircraft are B2 aircraft. And those are aircraft that have approach speeds of less than 121 knots. That's the B part of the designation. And aircraft that have wingspans less than 79 feet. That's the 2 part of the designation. And we know that there is a desire to stay within that range, that we don't want to accommodate aircraft larger than that. Now, that doesn't mean that a larger aircraft couldn't land here, but we certainly don't want to invite that with the facilities and design standards that we'd be planning for in the master plan. When we look at the critical aircraft, these are sort of listing the largest, the ones with the highest maximum takeoff weight that we see on a regular basis here at the airport. And the top 6 are listed here, and they're shown graphically. So we're talking about aircraft like the Super King Air, the Citation CJ3. Those types of aircraft are the twin engine, some of the smaller business jets. Those are operating here now. And the goal is to be able to accommodate those more easily, more safely, but not to really be inviting aircraft larger than that. So with that in mind, the next step in the advisory circular is to then look at what grouping of aircraft we're designing for. And the FAA has 3 groups that they break these aircraft in. Aircraft that weigh 12,500 pounds or less, aircraft that are between 12,500 and 60,000 pounds, or aircraft that are 60,000 pounds or heavier. Aircraft that weigh heavier than 60,000 pounds won't ever come into factor here. Those are looked at individually, and they just won't ever be accommodated in an airport like Maury. Aircraft between 12,500 and 60 do make sense, and anything less than 60,000, you look at a family grouping of the aircraft. And so again, we're talking about small jets. Less than 60,000. If an aircraft weighs less than 60,000, you look at a grouping of the aircraft. You know, if an aircraft weighs more than that, you look at aircraft by aircraft characteristics. So we're in that 12,500 to 60,000 pound category with the aircraft that we're talking about. Now, that's a wide category, and in staying in the B2 family, we're going to be closer to that 12,500 than we are to 60,000. I mean, I think some of the maximum weights of the aircraft that make sense are going to be 20,000, 30,000 pound. So we have to keep that in mind, and we'll explain why as we get into the next steps here. So when we're talking about this grouping of aircraft, 12,500 to 60,000, we use Chapter 3 of this advisory circular. And in that chapter, they break up the groups of aircraft into what they call a 75% fleet mix and then a 100% fleet mix. Now, why the FAA calls them that, I don't know. But essentially, the 75% fleet mix is the smaller of that grouping of aircraft. So we said 12,500 to 60,000 pounds. When we're talking about the 75% of fleet, we're talking about the smaller end of those types of aircraft. The 100% fleet, they're talking about a more comprehensive list. We're talking about larger business jets, and we're not really looking at that as being the group of aircraft that we want to consider here at Middleton. Yep.
Excuse me, I have a question.
Sure.
Am I allowed to ask?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, so you're saying you're not looking at those, but you're also saying earlier, you said, well, that doesn't actually preclude them. It doesn't inherently limit larger aircraft from landing at this airport.
Right.
So, and as I understand it, you're saying, well, we're gonna aim for the 75% fleet mix. What's gonna be the guarantee? Is it gonna?
There really is no guarantee.
There is no guarantee.
I
just wanted that clearly
I mean,
on the record.
and I would liken it to a semi-truck deciding to drive down an alleyway. There's nothing to stop somebody from doing that, but if they get stuck and they can't get out, it's kind of their mistake. And so we wouldn't design for that, you know. It's not really what we're shooting for, but there's nothing to stop someone if they want to land here and do that. They may have an ability to land and have difficulty getting out.
Or they may not.
Or they may not. But we do see, and as you look on here, there are aircraft within that 100% group that have landed here. And so in that 100% fleet, you've seen a couple of operations of,
Right.
and this is at the bottom of the Challenger 300, there is no guarantee.
Thank you.
And Rich, I see you're questioning that.
I don't think we've ever had a challenger, to be honest.
Yeah, and there's not many. It's showing 2, and sometimes there are stray ones that show up on the TFC database, but
Yeah.
that's coming straight from FAA flight records, so I don't know.
I have a question, though.
Yep.
So the current 4,000-foot runway will handle most B-2 aircraft, correct? Well, for example, the largest typical business jet can land in less than 4,000 feet, the Gulfstream 450. It's one of the largest business jet and can land actually in 3,250 feet.
What you failed to mention there is that it can't take off. So it might land, but it's a one-way in, and then it's stuck. So nobody would ever come in to permanently park their multi-million-dollar airplane for good.
Well, then there's the other question. If the 4,000-foot runway can handle most B-2, then go to Dane County. You know, that's the thing I don't understand. We talk about the 5,000-foot runway and so forth. They handle more aircraft, weather, et cetera, et cetera. So go to Dane County. We got that airport. We're really a regional airport to handle local traffic. And that's why I didn't understand when there was the original survey done. The surveys, 2 surveys, by the way, if people didn't know. There was a first survey that frankly, I guess, didn't get a very good response as far as people were going to use the airport, correct? Second response, weren't happy with that, so we went and did another survey. You know, you do an experiment, you don't like the results you got, so we changed the parameters, you know, to get the results we want. And so they went out 5 to 8 states. Well, really, how many aircraft regularly come here or go out of here to 5 to 8 states? And again, so go use Dane County. That's why we've got it. Don't, you know, 4,000 feet right now, with 2 operators right now, it's noisy.
How do you define
All right? Get more people, more aircraft, 5,000 foot, it's gonna get noisier.
New York, DC.
And it's interesting to note, I think that some of the people here who are involved principally with the airport in some way or another don't live in Middleton. Or they live downtown, they live on the south end, others live in places else outside of town, and they're not near the airport. So that's something worth mentioning.
I think you're also discounting the economic impact that those people would have landing in Middleton versus Dane County. The fuel they buy for the airport, the businesses that they visit, the restaurants that they go to, the hotels that they stay in.
Well, it's
So
only a cab
you're saying
ride
that you
from-
want that to go to Dane County.
Well, there's only a cab ride from Dane over to here.
You'll lose
that Yeah.
business from residents who pack up and leave and development that's
Okay, let's let Greg continue on. I noted, your comment is so noted.
Okay, thank you.
Can I ask one question? So the statement was made that the survey involves 7 states, is that really true?
Give him a microphone.
I can't hear you, Mayor.
Well, as a mayor,
We'll let the mayor speak.
any committee, I'm a member of all the city committees, and this is one of the committees. My question is that, I saw this handout too, so that city conducted a pilot survey of 7 surrounding states, is that true?
It was a radius, I believe, from the airport, a nautical mile radius, a distance. And
7 states. It was handpicked by Jay too, and it was 7 states. A member of the AMPAC made the distribution list for the
Can we let Greg answer the mayor's question without
Only
interference?
if he knows the answer, the correct answer.
Well, you're correct. I mean, I think we worked with Jade on trying to look at a regional outreach on the use of the airport. And we looked at registered pilots, correct me if I'm wrong, Jade, within a nautical mile distance of the airport. I'm not sure what states eclipsed that or covered that area, and maybe you can
I would have
can
to
help.
review the data that I pulled from a third party called JetNet.
Data, I don't know if that data would be valid, should be valid. Okay, thank you.
I just want to add, one of the things that we noticed with the original survey, to address Mr. Bartholomew's point, when you do a survey of users, you want to identify existing users and potential users. That was the intent. That was the intent of the master plan of the survey process, and we discussed how we could do that. And I reached out to, I think actually Rich Morey might have been part of that conversation too, but we became aware that there was a database out there. What's it called? JetNet, you said? JetNet. And Ms. Holfelt said that she had access to it, and I think you have is it a subscription or whatever it is?
Correct.
Correct. And so she, at the city's request, not at her suggestion, offered to pull that data at no charge to the city so that we could survey potential users. And the parameters were not handpicked. It was some criteria, and I don't know what it is, and apparently you, off the top of your head, don't remember either, but it was based on a radius.
I don't recall, but I don't believe
Right.
that I actually picked the criteria. I think it was provided to me by Mead and Hunt or the city
Okay.
in terms of the range.
Okay. I just wanted to
I just
clarify
did a
that this
service
was
by
not
running
this was not something that the Capital Flight initiated. I just wanted to put that out there.
Yes, but I would like to just add one thing to that, because I reviewed the commission's discussion of that before the last meeting, and I was surprised to find out that there actually was someone who referred, and it's in the minutes, I can't remember the date, I don't have them in front of me. Somebody said, well, doesn't this look like we're gonna try to basically rejig the survey till we get the results that we want? And I think that might have given the city pause. It certainly gave me pause when I read that, and I thought, well, they went ahead and did it anyway. I just want to clarify
Actually,
that.
the airport commission minutes, July 16,
Yep, and I was the
2018.
person that made that comment, and I would like to clarify that. It was explained, and I was involved with getting the first survey information out to the current users, the people that we had a list that were in and out of the facility regularly, our hangar customers. Of course, people that are based there have a certain point of view. Again, as Mark pointed out, this is a survey. The second survey was to gauge potential users if certain things would happen, what they would want to see. That was explained to me at the time, and I took that as clearly that was a legitimate reason to do the second survey. So I made the comment, and my comment was, after things were explained to me, I was content with the answer.
Thanks, because that's not in the minutes.
So in the first survey, though, I'm looking on page 55. Is your aircraft based at Middleton Municipal Airport? 43% said yes, 57% no. So you're saying you want even more than 57% to be driving these survey results. Is that what your point is?
You know, I think the goal was, if people are using the airport now, the facilities are adequate for the people that are making use of the airport now. And if you ask someone, is the Middleton, is the runway length adequate for what you're doing now? The answer being yes isn't all that surprising.
Actually, 84% said yes, the runway length is excellent or good.
Yeah,
84%.
I thought it was even higher than that.
Well, it might be, but I'm looking at
yeah.
page 60.
So if all those people were, almost 60% were non-users and they're content with it, then why was the need felt to expand it? Other than, I don't know, you didn't like the results. I mean, I understand what you're saying, but I did not notice that in the survey results, that many of them were non-users, so I'm
No,
a little bit confused.
they weren't non-users. What they were is non-based aircraft. Everyone that we supplied the information out had used that facility, which is how we knew about them.
Thanks.
Right, and so I think what we were trying to do with the more regional survey is capture what potential users would come on the scene if additional facilities were there. That's just part of a master plan process. We know that
Aren't we
people.
back to the vision? What is the vision for Maury Airport?
And I think, you know, I agree, you know, and what we decide to do with that and how we decide to accommodate those potential users is really a big question, you know,
It is a
and
big
it
question.
is tied to the vision and what the city and what the advisory committee wants to do. But, you know, to try to gather the information, that was the intent of that second survey.
I would say that having been staff to the Airport Commission as it's gone through various members over the years and has never done a master plan, the whole purpose of a master planning process is to help define the vision for the future. And so as part of that, you survey, just like you would if you were building a swimming pool or a new school, you try to identify the needs of the future, future people who live in the community or come to it or do business here. And this planning process that you're all engaged in is going to help establish what the city's long-term vision is for the airport. Whether a decision is made to add hangar space, or to add a longer runway, or to add a crosswind runway, or to do nothing. That's the outcome of this planning process, will be that vision.
That's fine, but the March 26, 2019 current comprehensive plan transportation element draft for the airport says, continue to plan for and operate the municipal airport in a manner that supports regional economic development, maximizes financial self-sufficiency, that's fine, and serves as an attractive gateway to the community. That's a different vision than what you've had previously. So I think there is a vision, at least on paper, in draft form.
If I may adjust, that's what we're doing now, and we're going to continue to do that. This is a great economic engine and multiplier for the city and for Western Dane County. It also provides a great service.
You personally from this.
And you keep throwing out the word like region, emphasizing it. Is there a definition that's provided in that? Or regionally, since you emphasize that?
So the words, regional.
Okay, so, I mean, we could look at regional as being the Midwest, we could look at regional as being the Eastern and Midwest. So,
So,
It really widens that up.
wait.
You have to be words in that context.
Middleton's
Please.
supposed to be a community airport, you know, and to use the analogy that Mark did, if the Middleton Cross Plains was going to do a survey, so you're going to go out to Baraboo and do a survey also. The point is, you would do it in the immediate vicinity. You serve the community, and serving the community isn't necessarily just to build a business district, it's to serve the community. And I'm not aware that Middleton, Dane County is in dire economic straits. And so, you know, how much economic development do we need? And I think it's about time to think of the people. There's going to be more of them who surround the airport. I realize that the Middleton Airport's tucked away in the northwest corner. Probably doesn't affect some people, at least those that vote maybe, in Middleton. But nonetheless, it does affect a lot of people in the community. If you look at community in the broadest sense, Springfield and town of Middleton. And I think we're getting away from, well, okay, let's even ask, who's going to benefit financially? I would really like to know who is in favor of the airport. Are there people back behind it that we don't know? Are there people who would prefer to have the airport? What's their agenda? What are they getting out of it? What is Middleton getting out of it? And I think some of that information should be disclosed and should be lucid and should be candid.
and I think the purpose of this committee, this advisory committee, was to represent all different viewpoints. So if you want an entire committee of people that are against the airport expansion, then I don't know that that represents everybody's viewpoint.
I agree.
So-
Not when you have a
I
direct
agree.
financial benefit because you are
Okay.
making your
Well,
living on the
Okay,
airport.
okay, wait.
Be recognized.
Let's continue on with Greg's presentation.
And thank you, and I appreciate those comments, and I think those are all things that we have to bring into this discussion, but if I could just walk through what the FAA guidance outlines, and we can go from there. So, on step 4, we talked about the weight, we talked about the grouping of aircraft, and again, we're in that 75% fleet mix, the smaller end of the 12,500 to 60,000 pound aircraft. When we look at that, we have to look at that in relationship to the elevation of the airport, the weight of the aircraft, the maximum load, the distance that these aircraft are traveling. And that's another division of this. The FAA further breaks it into a 60 or 90% useful load factor. And again, when we look at the trips and the distances from the airport that are being made, we're looking at the smaller ranges. We're looking at the 60% useful load. And so all of that really boils down to when we're breaking it into this weight group of aircraft, we're talking about the 12,500 to 60,000 pound aircraft. We're talking about the smaller grouping of those aircraft, closer to the 12.5, kind of the maximum 20,000 pound, making shorter distances. That results in a runway length between 4730 and 6290 from FAA guidance. Now, we have to sort of look at what that means in terms of this runway. That's a wide range, and I think what we're looking at is closer to the smaller end of that range. So that's what the FAA guidance yields. The other thing we want to look at And there's the step 6 is there's adjustments to those lengths based on how high the airport is, what elevation it's at, and the grade difference between the runway. The runway's basically flat. There's 1 foot of elevation difference from one end of the runway to the other, so there's not a big adjustment there. And we're not up in a mountainous region. We're only at 928 feet MSL, so there's not a huge adjustment there, but those also factor into the runway length. Yep, Julie?
Before you go on to step 6, I have a question for clarification, because I don't understand everything that you've got on these slides, and I have a copy of it here. On point 3 of your first slide related to step 5, it says existing trips do not account for existing runway limitations. Have I missed something that you've already gone over this? I don't understand what that means exactly.
Right, so I think when we're looking at the grouping of aircraft, the B-2 aircraft, we know that they are limited by the length now, that they might be making more trips if we had longer runway length. So when we're looking at that critical threshold, that 500, and so it's sort of a chicken or egg kind of thing. We don't have as many operations because we don't have the runway length, but if we had the runway length, we'd have more operations. So I think that's what we're trying to
That's what that means?
get to.
Existing
right.
trips do not account for existing runway
That's
limitations?
poorly
means that-
worded, yeah.
That you think that with longer runways, there'll be more trips, is that? I'm very confused about that, I'm not.
Means more volume?
Right, I think what we're saying is with the B-2 aircraft that operate now, things have to be in good condition for them to operate there now. That they're not maybe leaving fully fueled, it's not a hot day, the runways aren't wet or slippery. That if we had a longer runway length, that those types of aircraft could more easily utilize the field.
Is that good? I think some of the people here feel that that's just gonna make more trouble. There's gonna be more noise, more pollution, whatever. So, and I must say that when I read the chapter 3, it was written as if it were somebody, an apologist for having the 5,000-foot runway. I didn't see any justification or comparison, 4,000 versus 5,000. What are the reasons for 5,000 versus a 4,000? Pluses and minuses. I think that should have been in the report. It's assumed by reading the report that 5,000 is good. We don't know, maybe 4,000 is fine.
And I think when we're talking about comparisons and pros and cons, we're talking about an alternatives analysis, which is the next step. I think what we're trying to define under this chapter is a runway length that is based on FAA guidance and user survey responses and how the airport sits in relationship to the overall state system plan.
So Greg, are we addressing alternative analysis tonight?
No, we're not.
Because it is as being addressed in July in your scheduled, in your slides, so that's why I'm a little bit confused. So we're talking about this, but we're not gonna talk about comparisons until the next meeting.
That's the next step.
correct?
That's right.
So this slide is, and I'm not saying this to put you on the spot, I just wanna make sure I understand, because I'm very confused about the scheduling, as is Professor Bartholomew. So even though it says that there's gonna be some discussion or some meetings, some meeting in July about alternative analysis, that's not correct, right?
We have talked that the schedule has changed, and I don't know if you're looking at
I'm looking at the
this,
one you just gave
this
us.
slide.
Yeah, it's on page 31 of the packet that we received. I was confused about that, so now I didn't know what alternative analysis was, and I was
Right.
gonna bring it up, but since you brought it up,
So we have alternatives analysis starting in July.
Yeah, you
After
do.
this meeting, going through August, through September, and the intent is to present on the alternatives analysis in September.
Greg, as I understand that schedule, this is like a task flow for Mead and Hunt staff as well.
Right.
So you haven't, in other words, you haven't started work on the alternatives analysis, is that, or
We have
maybe
not, no.
you have not?
Yeah.
So I think the idea
get
is.
it now.
You get it, okay, good.
So did I answer your question on step 5 too, and kind of the process that the FAA lays out?
yeah, you did.
Okay.
I'm sorry, but I it's just like, you used a sentence that, a phrase that is really saying, well, we can't really, these existing trips don't, if they could be more if we had longer runways, but you don't say that, you just say, existing trips do not account for existing runway limitations. And it doesn't mean anything to me, and I don't think it means anything, it didn't mean it, if you read that, I'm not, that's my only thing, and I'm glad you clarified it, but
Well, what it means.
I'm gonna be asking a lot of questions like.
What it means is when we're talking about the 60 or 90% useful load, what we're talking about is where these planes need to go. So if a plane needs to make a West Coast destination, they are gonna need to leave with a lot of fuel, and they're probably gonna bring a lot of passengers, so they're gonna leave heavy. And then you would have greater justification to use that 90% useful load chart. But what we've looked at from the operations is that there's not a lot of West Coast destinations, that the destinations that are being addressed are relatively local and jive more with the 60% useful load, that they don't need to leave that fully heavy.
So the useful load is the useful fuel load?
Yes, exactly. So
Okay.
the maximum takeoff weight of the aircraft is full of fuel, full of passengers, and then there's an operating empty weight, and that's no fuel, no passengers, no baggage. The difference between that is the useful load. So that's the fuel, the baggage, the passengers themselves. And so if we're talking 60% of that useful load, we're talking, you know, that they don't have to leave full of fuel. And it's not like when you take a trip in your car, you're gonna fill your car full of gas and go somewhere. When you fly a plane, you have to look at the weight and balance, and you don't always leave full of fuel. You have to look at what the temperature is, what the conditions are, and all that factors into. So we're looking at the smaller end of this. We're looking at the 60% useful
But what does that
load.
mean, Greg? I mean, how many passengers with bags are in B2 classification of aircraft?
Not a lot, but I mean.
Well, give me a number. 4, 8, 10?
I think some of the larger aircraft that we were showing there were probably like 10 passengers. So that CJ3, the smaller business jets would accommodate about that. Rich, tell me if I'm wrong on that.
But it has more to
typical
do with
passengers.
just passengers and bags
I think
And
Jade's
fuel.
more qualified on
Yeah.
jets than I
and
am.
runway conditions.
It's overall weight,
So,
Yeah.
air conditions, temperatures.
But basically, that term useful load is the difference between the aircraft being empty and the aircraft full of fuel, full of passengers, and full of baggage, however many that is.
So today, there was a CJ3 at the airport today, right, Rich?
Yep.
And it was a pretty hot day. Fortunately, wasn't hotter, but it was hot. So it may not have left with a full tank of
It
fuel.
was dropping people off. It did not take, did it take fuel? It might have taken some fuel, but I'm sure it was limiting, and then was able to take off without passengers, so.
And without
the
a full tank.
CJ3 holds 10 people, so there's very little chance, full of fuel, full of all 10 people, that it could ever leave Middleton.
Well, why does
On
it
this
have to
hot
be
day.
On this hot day.
Why can't, again, come back to.
Because
we've
it
got
landed
this
at Middleton.
Right.
We've got this, pardon?
Because it landed
Hey,
at
if
Middleton.
it stays in a
no, what I'm
hotel and
saying is that
eats,
we've
then you
got-
have more economic development.
We've got Dane County, and why do we keep talking about making this runway bigger when we already have a national airport right here?
Well, it clearly wasn't an issue because they dropped people off, but
No, what I'm saying
if
is,
they're
you know,
doing
why is
business
that
in
worry?
Middleton, it's probably very convenient for them to land in Middleton.
I don't think most people here are too worried about the passenger's convenience,
wouldn't.
where they can get someplace in Madison rather easily
Well,
from
some
here.
people's time is worth money and some people's is not.
Okay, all right. Stop. Let's let Greg continue. Please.
So I guess to reiterate the analysis and maybe to help answer your question is that we are looking at the smaller trip lengths when we're talking about the 60% useful load, because that's what's able to be accommodated now. What that comment, that last bullet was getting at is that if there was a longer runway length, folks might be able to make a longer distance trip, and we just don't know that. So I thank you for the opportunity to clarify that, because I can see that being confusing. So the upshot of, again, is this range that the FAA advisory circular results in, and we're really looking at being on the smaller end of that range. The smallest of that range is a 47 30-foot runway. We know the existing's 4,000. Again, this is just the FAA's guidance. We have to look at its other factors. And what we want to also consider is how the state, the Wisconsin State System Plan, looks at Middleton in terms of the overall system plan. And Rob, I know I was going to turn it over to you to talk a little bit about how Middleton is classified. It's classified as a large GA airport. It's one of 14 in the state. And how that compares to other large GA airports in the state, we don't feel that it's ever going to really be able to live up to the facilities at larger airports like Waukesha and Kenosha. There just isn't the room and the space to do that. But we want to talk about some of those other factors, and then also touch on some of the things that you folks had asked us to do, like look at increasing runway lengths. And Bob, I think you were making this comment, comparing it to other airports with larger runway lengths. And Rob's going to get into that analysis a little bit.
I have a quick question for you, Greg. And I just want to mention it publicly in case that results in a change in the chapter. What I noticed is the table that we just discussed, or the chart, at least one of them, maybe a couple, was not in chapter 3. Are you planning to add that? I mean, you had it in the slides, but not, from what I could tell, not in the chapter. And maybe that's why we had more questions. So referring not to that one, but the before that, the
This one here?
no, that's in here.
It's in there.
I can't, maybe I'm missing it, but it was the one with the, it wasn't, it was the one with the curve, the.
Oh, I'm sorry, yeah.
Performance data.
Yeah, that one, right, that
Yeah,
one.
so this
So-
is just a snippet from the advisory circular itself. We are going to put those in the appendix.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify that for our notes, just,
The results of these curves are summarized in the chapter. We didn't want to put the chart themselves in the body of the chapter, but it'll be in the appendix.
okay. But I just wanted people to understand that that's why this chapter it is fluid process, so that this sort of information will be, anything that you're seeing in the summary is addressed in the material that's in the chapter or in the appendix.
Right.
Okay,
Thank you.
all right.
Okay, thanks. So like Greg said, try to move this a little closer. So like Greg said, we also wanted to take Maury and compare it to some of the airports, other airports. So not look at it in isolation. This is something that was suggested that we do during the last meeting, was to try to compare and really do two things. One, just kind of see how Maury compares to other airports, but then also as you continue to increase runway length, even just hypothetically, when is that tipping point where you have larger aircraft and more of those aircraft? So really what we're going to do here and over the next few slides is that we're going to talk about how that runway length could possibly impact aircraft size. We're going to do it first by just looking at the large GA airports in Wisconsin, because that's what Maury is. Then we're going to be looking at medium and large, just because there's not a ton of large airports, so it kind of opens up the comparisons a little bit more. And then finally, just to make sure we are being thorough, we also zoomed out and compared more to some of the other airports around the country that have a similar dynamic, to try to show how any increases in runway length or other factors as well could impact activity at the airport. So first off, what we have, yes?
So when you looked at these comparable airports, I remember in chapters 1 and 2 with the forecast projections, you sometimes looked at comparable airports. Are these the same list of comparable airports, or were those different?
No, these are different.
These are different.
Well, some of them. There's probably going to be some overlap between the previous chapters.
But it's kind of independent, a new list.
Yeah, we've increased the amount of airports that we've looked at because we were trying to make sure we found good matches.
Cynthia, I would just add to that our initial comparison was to other airports in Wisconsin. And because.
So that's chapter 1 and 2.
Yeah, I think there was really more focusing on airports in the state. What we tried to do is, because there's a sort of a unique nature, how close this airport is to an airport like Madison, but not towered, we were trying to find other airports, similar elevations, similar facilities, and that's why we took that broader reach because there's other factors that play into. So that was why, as Rob will get into, we looked at things on a more national level to try to find airports more similar.
Right, so when you say similar, did you look at airports, did any of them border two other municipalities, all with homes and schools?
I think if you let Rob get into what we tried to
Yeah,
find as the criteria.
We will get into that.
Okay.
It's just in 2 slides here. So this is kind of the base level, just pretty easy starting point right here is just what's the runway length at these other large GA airports in Wisconsin compared to the operations that occur at that airport. So Over on the right side, you can see the number of operations, and Maury is kind of right in the middle of the pack there. Down at the bottom, we have about 25,000 operations for the less busy airports. Up at the top, Oshkosh, Fond du Lac, 60,000, so that's the range. And Maury sits just about right in the middle there at 40,000.
So Rob, just quick question, do the 38,000 operations at Maury include the flight training?
Yes.
And do we know sort of the flight training that's going on in the other? Would we say that they're about the same as Maury or less, or do we even know?
It will be.
I don't want
Sure.
the flight operations to be skewed one way or the other because of the fact that we really do have a lot of flight training going on at Middleton. I just don't know.
Sure, which means more touch and goes, and then it would create some variance. No, it's a good question. The point of this particular comparison was just to look at the other large GA airports, so the way that Wisconsin categorizes them. Flight training would vary, some would be more, some would be less, but that's not something that this right here classifies. And then, so that's the operations right in the middle of the pack. And then if we look at the runway length, though, so at 4,000 feet, Maury is actually the second to last for runway length. There's a lot of variance here. It goes from 3,900 feet with East Troy, which is the shortest runway, all the way up to a grand 8,000 feet at Oshkosh. But of course, that's not something in the cards here. But so that's kind of how it stacks up within the state with large GA airports. The other thing we wanted to point out is, oh, I'm sorry, Julie. Yes.
Just while you're on that comparison, I noticed that East Troy also has a very short runway and has more general aviation operations in and out. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So are they looking to expand theirs or just Middleton?
I can't say I'm very familiar with that airport.
The other question I had, just for clarification, is really just East Troy and Middleton, when they list the airports, you list them by number, by a letter and then numbers.
Oh, the code?
Curious, why do you do that and the other ones have, STE, OSH and all that?
Sure. No, it's a good question. This is a 3-letter identifier for the airport. So, for instance, it's really just for clarity. If you go to, some of the bigger cities, there are multiple airports. So the code is to distinguish exactly what airport we're talking about there.
Can I just ask another technical question?
Sure.
So, regional airport in 2012, the FAA adopted a new classification scheme and turned Maury, for federal purposes, into a regional airport. And Dane County is also a regional airport, but it's a Class C airspace. What is the airspace? Is it a different class for
Sure.
Maury? Because it's not the same. I mean, I know Dane County has commercial flights like United and Delta and all that.
Yeah, no, you're right. It is a different airspace classification, but that's something quite different.
Do you know what it is, the air class
For here?
For
Or
Maury.
yes, class Delta.
Delta?
Delta.
Thank you.
Right.
Okay, and just to clarify a little bit, the numbers of operations at East Troy, they have a very active skydiving club.
Thanks.
And
Which
sorry,
we
just
should
to
be
clarify,
real
did you say
happy
that
that we
Maury
don't.
was Class Delta?
Or sorry, it's not, is it? It's Echo?
Not Class Delta.
It's
Echo?
a Golf Echo.
Class-
Okay,
Yeah.
thanks,
Golf
Echo.
Echo?
Yeah, it depends on a few factors. I don't know if we want to go into deep detail.
Essentially call it uncontrolled airport
That's what
versus a
info
controlled airport.
Sure.
Uncontrolled?
I can give you a very brief summary, just 2 sentences.
So it's not Delta, I just want to be
It's
clear.
not.
No, it's not Delta. Yeah, my mistake. It's Echo. Basically, as you go up, it has higher restrictions. For instance, if you go up to Class B, which is around like, somewhere like Boston or Atlanta, there are restrictions, even for sometimes student pilots can't get into it without an endorsement. There are different contacts you have to have with the tower there, if there is a tower. So it's just different restrictions on it. Okay, so, but to go back to do you have a
Well, I just
comment?
want to understand this Class Delta. Does that just mean Class D?
No, I'm sorry, it is not Delta, it is Echo.
But the term is really Class D, Class E, and you're just using
Oh,
what
yeah.
how it's referred to.
Yes, my mistake.
Okay, say that, so is it a Class E like Echo?
Right, there's Class A,
Oh,
B,
thank
C, D,
you.
E, but
Thank you.
but
That
there's
makes more sense.
Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta, Echo is
Got
what
it.
they use.
That's the pilot of me coming
Pilot
back from
lingo, yeah.
years
Thank
ago. Yeah. Yes, Julie?
I have another question on this slide that you have up. It says large GA airports in Wisconsin would ideally have a 5,500 or greater runway based on Wisconsin State Airport System Plan 2030. What is That, and then also it says, there's a star, an asterisk by it, and it says actual runway dimensions to be determined by critical aircraft. First, who developed that Wisconsin State Airport System Plan 2030? What is a critical aircraft? And please forgive me if we've already covered this, but
Sure. No, I was actually about to get to that, so that works out very well. So when I say large GA airport, that's how the state views the airport. The SASP is the State Airport System Plan, but it's basically Wisconsin looking at all airports in the state and seeing how they work together.
what agency does that?
The state, the Bureau of Aeronautics.
BOA
Yeah.
does that.
Bureau of
Yeah.
Aeronautics, yeah.
And DOT vote? Or
That's
or
the
BOA
DOT.
within DOT?
Yeah, the Bureau of Aeronautics. So that's the agency that does that report, does that study. And so when they classify it as a large GA airport, that's based on, oh, we actually have another. Should we bring that up?
I can
Okay.
bring that up.
So when it's classified as a large GA airport, that is taking a few things into consideration. That's looking at the location of the airport, that is looking at the activity that takes place on the airport, and
Yeah, that's what
I think Mark handed. as
yeah,
part
it
of
is
your
a handout actually.
Oh, it's in the yellow one. Okay, thank you.
When I read the chapter, I had that question too, and so I asked them for this information yesterday and thought it would be helpful.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So while we're talking with the Airport System Plan 2030, I saw the chart, the updated airport classification evaluation process. I saw one item as a qualifier that was missing, proximity to a commercial service airport. Should not have been in there as far as as part of the classification chart.
That chart is not one that we did.
Okay, it says Wisconsin State Airport System Plan 2030. So Bureau of Aeronautics did that?
I believe so, Greg. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
this is straight out of their system plan.
Right.
Okay. Well, we were given that as a handout recently, so I'm just questioning.
Sure.
What I'm saying is the fact that it isn't comprehensive.
Mhm. All right, but so this is how they come up with their large GA qualification, same with medium, small, and commercial airports. So actually, if we go back to the PowerPoint, if that's all right, Greg. So it's saying for a large GA airport, so this is kind of getting back to your question, Julie, but for a large GA airport, it's just a base level rule, a general rule of thumb, they recommend a 5,500-foot runway for a large GA airport, the state does. However, that asterisk is there because it says actual runway dimensions to be determined by critical aircraft. That critical aircraft is that B2 designation. That's what we're looking at when we were selecting the critical aircraft. That was also step one in the process that Greg went through. So that's kind of the base level of determining runway length. So to sum this up, 5,500 feet is kind of the base rule of thumb for all large GA airports in Wisconsin, but they do say that they do acknowledge that conditions are going to be different in each airport.
Okay, could I address that a minute? Because West Bend, let me comment on that. West Bend was told by the FAA that they did not meet the needs to qualify for FAA grant funds to lengthen their runway, and they have more B2 operations than Maury. Second, if West Bend and Termin airports can handle larger volumes of B2 aircraft with shorter runways, granted they're not as short as Maury's 4,000, why does Maury need a 5,000-foot runway? Let me continue here for a minute. Also, one of the charts you had shows both West Bend and Timmerman airports have more B2 operations than Maury's with less than 5,000-foot runway. Okay, just saying that.
No, that's...
They don't need a 5,000-foot runway is what I'm saying.
Sure, and that is something we'll address actually in the next slide. So if it's all right, I'll wait until then, and then we can kind of circle back to that if there's outstanding questions.
Can I just ask,
yes.
so the B2 critical aircraft category,
Mhm.
has Maury always targeted that, or is that just a current or a continuation or new?
I think Greg can...
I guess the way I would answer that is when the airport was redeveloped back in 2002, 2003, there were standards and critical aircraft criteria that were looked at in how that airport got reconfigured and redeveloped. And yes, I would say the B2, those standards have changed over time, but if you look at the runway to taxiway separation, if you look at the width of the runway, all of those factors and facilities out there are consistent with B2 standards.
So was it like B1 before that, or?
Before that, it was very primitive.
Yeah.
But it was state-of-the-art in 1942.
Yeah, I think prior to the redevelopment, I don't think it met really a lot of standards. Yeah.
Okay, so moving on to,
Could I ask
sorry,
a
Mark.
question, if that's
Sure.
okay, Mr. Chair? So that list, so Oshkosh, for example, and Janesville, with those much longer runways, longer than anything, we would ever have here, those are probably a different design group than they're geared to, probably like a. well, I
That
don't
is a
even
very
stick
safe
with
bet,
D.
yes.
Yeah, so this chart does not, just wanted to drive home the point that these are not B2
Yes.
design group.
No, that's a great observation, a great thing to call out. So this is just by runway length and just by the state classification, not by the B2 classification. That would vary by airport. Okay, so if we go on to step 8 here. So we've been mentioning the large GA and the, well, so far just the large GA, but there's also medium and small, like I said. So this is actually a picture from the SASP, from that state aviation system plan. Shows all the airports in the state, everything that they considered in that plan. And if you can make out what's on there, the small blue aircraft, those are the medium, and then the green are the large GA, just like Maury. You can kind of notice how all the large GA are mainly grouped to the southeast where it's more densely populated. Further north you go, there aren't really as many of them, whereas the medium GA airports are pretty evenly distributed in comparison. And what we wanted to do, because Maury is at the bottom of that large GA grouping by the runway length, we also wanted to compare it to medium-sized airports and see how it compared against them.
Rob,
So-
can I ask, did Maury become a large general aviation airport in like the last some X years?
Do you know
or
the year,
what was it
Greg?
Before?
I don't know the exact year, but I would say it's within the last 10. It was a medium airport.
It was a medium
it
airport
was.
before that?
Yeah, and I can't tell you the exact time frame. They update that state system plan every maybe 10 years, and so there was a transition point there where it went from medium to large.
That would be based on operations or on
All
facilities?
those things on that table there.
The yellow sheet.
On the back of that yellow sheet. So those are the criteria that play into it. So how many registered pilots are within a certain distance, the road and infrastructure that make the airport accessible, the economy, all those play into the classification of that.
And I would add that, I don't remember exactly when it was, but it was at least 5 years ago, Cynthia, that I remember being surprised when I saw that we were large, and I asked the same question. So what this was the state doing an airport, doing a new airport system plan, which we discussed 2012 or whenever that was. And obviously they didn't contact local communities, at least in the case of Middleton. They, and that's not uncommon. They just develop they have an approach for developing standards. They look at, whatever the state of the art is for these classifications, probably based on national trends, whatever. And someone at the Hill Farms office building probably developed these standards and then just applied them and developed that. And then I found out about it later. And I'm sure a lot of communities, we didn't specifically have that input.
Thank you.
But I would add that doesn't mean that it's necessarily a good or a bad thing. It just was a classification that the state did.
You had mentioned that Maury's is going to be B2 as a critical aircraft. Just curious if you would respond to this statement. The B2 aircraft family as the designed aircraft for the airport runway length is considered a design factor component. Technically, the FAA requires a design aircraft to be one that performs 500 annual itinerant operations, basically leaves the local area, arrives from the outside the local area operation. On chart 2.6, page 221, shows that only about 150 B2 jet operations. So, what it amounts to is the FAA doesn't like a build it and they will come. Maybe what's being hoped will extend the runway so we get more aircraft. But currently, do you think it's going to meet the criteria that FAA stated for the design for B2 being a critical aircraft for this airport?
I think Greg is actually more familiar with this.
Yeah, thank you. I was sort of anticipating this question from you, Bob, because you're right. The critical threshold for operations is 500, and like we showed on that previous slide, we're only looking at about 174 operations there now. And you know, I think we talked about the limiting factors, the limiting things that are out there now. So I think we have, we know the P2 operations do occur, but I think we don't really have the facilities there to accommodate a lot of them. So it's that chicken or egg kind of thing again. I mean, if there were longer runway length, would we see more B2 operations? We're thinking yes. The requirements, that 12,500 to 60,000, that's right, you know, the B2 are right on the small end of that. If we were to look at something smaller, you know, it really doesn't jive with a large GA airport. The other thing I would add is that this is a non-towered facility. So those operations that we're identifying are those that filed an instrument flight rule. They filed a flight plan. And so we can track those because they file a flight plan. We know how many there are. There may be some B2 aircraft that are flying under visual flight rules, probably not a lot, but that might be some other thing that we're not accounting for. So when we're talking about those 174, those are the ones that we know of because they filed a flight plan. But you're right, we're not at that 500-foot threshold, but we feel that that B2, because the airport's been designed from the start as a B2, is the right critical aircraft for this airport.
And then,
But I think, if I'm hearing what you said correctly, at least in the beginning, we currently don't meet the strict the FAA B2 aircraft standards, but we're hoping to get there.
There are B2 operations here.
But I
There's
mean,
not
enough-
500 annual operations.
There's 174, is that correct?
Right.
right.
Yep.
Annual operations?
The other thing that you do when you select the critical aircraft, it's often in two parts. So there's the current one, and there's also the future critical aircraft, and that's what a lot of these designs are based on. Because if you build something, hypothetically, if you were to build something today, and then you need more later, it would fall apart very quickly. So in other words, it's kind of convoluted, but what I'm trying to say is that anytime you select a critical aircraft for the master plan, the FAA wants two. They want a current and a future. And so based on, in addition to what Greg said, but based on the trends that are currently happening in the general aviation community, just the transition away from smaller aircraft going into a bit bigger aircraft such as the B2, a little more commercial operations, that is a trend that makes the B2 a pick for the future critical aircraft.
So commercial aircraft, you're hoping to get commercial aircraft here too?
No, it's,
Redefined commercial aircraft for Bob, yeah.
what's that?
Sorry.
Fine commercial.
Oh, yeah. That's a surprisingly tricky question just because the FAA considers commercial aircraft in many different ways. So, I mean, you can have your normal air carriers, but you could also have something like a Part 135 operator that's taking you to A to B on a smaller chartered plane. And so it's essentially anything paid, anything for profit.
Anything for hire.
Right, anything for hire, for profit.
That's your definition of commercial, anything for hire?
That's the FAA's definition.
How about corporate aircraft for companies?
Sure.
You know, where a company would relocate in this area and then use this airport.
And cargo aircraft, I assume.
That's right.
What would
That
that?
would
what
fall
be
under
your-
Part 91, typically.
Yeah.
Well, this all sounds like growth to me, and again, I'm not sure that's what the community, the whole, as people, really want.
I just wanted to follow up a very quick question. It's not necessarily on point with what Bob was saying, but you said you're looking at filed flight paths for these 174 ops per year. With whom are those flight paths being filed?
Yeah, so if
I'm a little bit confused
if-
about that.
Yeah, if a plane files an instrument flight plan, that shows up on an FAA database that we have access to. Actually, anybody has access to it. So it's public record.
Only those that are using instrument flight, is that correct?
Only if they file an instrument flight plan.
Are they
So,
required to file an instrument flight plan? I didn't think they were.
Over 18,000.
Is that right? Yeah.
Over
If
18,000,
they're
I didn't
gonna go up to
understand that.
18,000 feet, then the answer is yes, otherwise weather will dictate that. And there are some operators that will always file an instrument flight plan.
Yeah, but how many of the operations here actually, do they go up above 18,000 normally?
We were actually about to discuss that on this, so I can kind of answer that question and then kind of rotate into this slide as well.
I don't want to cut off any other discussion that Bob has, but I just wanted to follow up on that right away, because I have been, I've just wondered where all this data is being gathered from. I wanted to know the source, so thank you.
Yeah, there is an FAA database, and I can provide you the link to that, and if you're interested.
To summarize maybe and to help this discussion, anytime one of Rich isn't there. Anytime one of Rich's students goes up, or I would venture to guess Capital Flight students, I don't think you're filing a flight plan, right?
Not typically unless the
unless
student
it's part
is
of the
an
training.
instrument student.
Unless it's part of the training, right? So it's my understanding, and as someone who has downloaded, who uses FlightAware, if you use FlightAware to track planes, those are aircraft that have filed a flight plan, including planes that sometimes will show up as ones that are here. So that's what they meant by publicly available data. And what requires you to file that flight plan has to do with altitude and weather conditions.
And weather. And
yeah.
one other thing I think it's important to point out about instrument flight plans at Maury, because we don't have a tower and because we're all talking on a common frequency and letting each other know where everybody is, if somebody does file an instrument flight plan, the airspace gets shut down to every other person that wants to go out on an instrument flight plan. It's one in, one out. So if somebody files a flight plan, picks up their flight plan, their instrument flight plan, and departs, that entire airspace is shut down to anybody else for landing on an instrument flight plan. I don't know if that makes sense or helps clarify, but it restricts the operations, because at that point you're waiting for Dane County Madison radar to pick you up and be able to separate you from other traffic.
One other item that I'd like to mention is if a traffic, and this often happens, will cancel their flight plan in the air and then land VFR, I don't believe that that's counted as an operation and because we do not have a ground link directly to the Madison Tower to be able to close our flight plans, they're often closed in the air, canceled, and then go through. So we do have more B2 operations undoubtedly than are listed there.
And so this kind of gets into one of the reasons that we selected instrument operations for this chart here. So this is, again, all all medium and large GA airports within the state of Wisconsin. And these are total instrument operations. So we selected instrument, one, because it is a lot easier to track. You can actually see what type of aircraft is landing. If we did total operations, we would not have that ability here. It would just be a blank slate of a bunch of aircraft, but we wouldn't know the sizes, and that's really the issue we're trying to address here. And two is that the larger aircraft do tend to file flight plans. It's more convenient for them. They can fly directly from A to B instead of having to maneuver around clouds. So what you're seeing right here is going to capture larger aircraft at a greater proportion than it would smaller aircraft. So, and let me kind of explain the way this chart is laid out. So it's organized by runway length, starts with the smallest on the left and then goes to the largest on the right. That's that black line you can see that goes up from about 3,000 to 8,000. Maury is the one in the yellow there, the rest are in blue. And then over on the left is instrument operations, so it just so happens the scales are the same, so that's convenient. But instrument operations are over on the left, so you can see there is a trend when you get towards the very end of the runway length that there is a spike in operations, but that's not the only thing going on. You'll notice that for the runway length, Maury, and that's also West Bend and Timmerman, have a lot more operations than other airports of their size, of the runway length at least, and this is what Professor Bartholomew was saying, because there are more factors than just the runway length at play here. And so what you'll really notice if you get towards the end, when you really start seeing those big spikes, at places like, wow, it's so hard to read. It's kind of small. It's a lot of airports. It's the only way to display it. But airports that are generally around Milwaukee and some of the more along the eastern side of the state. Basically, there's a couple of things that come into play. One is most of them have a tower, so an ATC, control tower. They also have a runway surface that's made of concrete, not asphalt, so it can actually handle much larger aircraft. Here at Moore, it's an asphalt runway, and so it wouldn't be able to handle these really heavy aircraft that fly into some of these other airports. And then finally, it's near a metro area, and it also has an ILS, which is an instrument landing system. So essentially what that means is that an airplane is able to come in under worse weather conditions. Here at Maury, the approaches really, honestly, are not that good compared to some of the other airports around it, which means if it's bad weather, the airplanes are kind of limited in coming into this airport. It's not as possible. So if we break this down a little bit further, this is actually by the type of aircraft. So again, this is a little zoomed in, kind of that middle section where Maury sits, and it goes from the left to the right, again, by runway length, how long the runway is. And runway length is on the right side this time, so on the far left, that's a 3,000-foot runway going up to a 5,000-foot runway. And then again, it's organized by instrument operations, but when we zoom in, we can actually see how the aircraft size breaks down for these for these airports. So you can see that even as you get up to a 5,000-foot length, if it's only the runway length, but you don't have those other components, the tower, the ILS, the instrument landing system, and the concrete runway to support the heavier operations, you're not really going to see those bigger aircraft yet. It doesn't increase in any meaningful way as you look at these airports right here. But so those were only Wisconsin airports. And are there any questions about
Actually,
that?
if I
Yes.
could make a comment on this slide, no, the next one, you bounced it back. Can you not put it on such a dense background? In the printed version, it was very difficult to read. I assume that's beautiful map of the state of the United States, but.
No, you're right. It looked pretty nice on the computer, but you're right.
So we could read it.
Yeah, the print version didn't come out very well. Yeah, we can certainly do that. So moving on to this then. So looking at backwards at the slides that we've covered, those were all Wisconsin airports, both large GA and medium GA. The issue we run into, though, is that there's just not a lot of good airports that really mimic Maury necessarily. And so we started to look around the country in an effort to find more of an apples-to-apples to comparison. Of course, this isn't going to be perfect, but we tried to find a few guidelines to pick out airports that would be decent to compare to Maury. So what you can see listed out right there, those are the items that we use. So ideally, near the urban area. We point out that Madison is a Class C airport. So ideally, something close to that it does not have a control tower. It has a similar instrument approach abilities, which is kind of what we discussed. And then it has to be within 1,000 feet of Maury's elevation. So for instance, as you go out west, and this is actually on the next slide, but as you go out west, because of that greater elevation, the runway lengths are a totally different comparison. You would need a very long runway just to have the exact same aircraft operations that you have here due to the less dense air. So this really breaks down to a lot of eastern and midwestern whenever we could, but then a couple airports also out to the east. You can see there are some big cities in there, like Pittsburgh is obviously much bigger than Madison, but the airports are further away from the metro center, which is why they were selected anyway.
I was just going to comment on that. I don't have the figure with me, but the Telluride Airport in Colorado, higher elevation, and they, even though they have a longer runway, they're able to get by with 4,000 feet very well.
Which airport is that?
Telluride.
No,
Telluride?
not 4,000.
No.
I've
What's
been
that?
in there, that's a lot longer than 4,000.
I don't have the figures in front. No,
Telluride's
it's
about-
longer,
yeah,
it's
it's a
longer, but
lot
they're able to
longer.
get by with.
That's an 8,800 above sea level airport.
Right.
And with at least 9,000 or 10,000 as far as runway length.
I know that, but I don't have the figures with me, but I do have where they're able to get by with a less runway length than we have here despite their elevation. I can supply that next time.
No, that's wrong.
Okay, I'll give it to you.
But I like to see it.
Okay, I'm
Been
glad to
there.
do that.
The reason that we didn't include these western airports was because actually if we did try to use them to come up with a runway length for Maury, it would be much longer than it actually needs to be. Because the aircraft out there have very poor performance in comparison. And so if we were to use the western airports, it would not be a fair comparison. The runway length would come back much longer than it's actually needed.
Telluride is 6,911 by 100 feet. Is one of their runways anyway.
Okay, now I'll bring that figure next time and show it to you.
I'm sorry, but what is that Milwaukee Airport? It's not the.
No, it's not the Milwaukee airport. That's the metropolitan area on the left. So let me.
But what's the name of that?
That's the West Bend Airport.
West Bend.
West Bend, that's what we're talking about, even though you put Milwaukee in there? Okay, thank you.
Sure. Yeah, my assumption here is that not everybody would know where the specific airports were. So that's why it lists the metropolitan area instead of the actual airport. But the actual airport itself is under the code. So if there's one that's confusing or something, it's specified there.
Got it.
You know, it might be helpful to have just the distance in nautical miles from that primary airport as
Sure.
part of this graph, because I did do it, and, you know, we're 8 nautical miles from Madison, and the rest of them are a lot farther.
Yeah, they do vary. Yeah, thanks. All right, so this is some of the criteria that we use to try to compare. Again, I do want to emphasize this is not going to be a perfect comparison. These are just some that we found that were similar. This is us trying to respond to see how the operations could change with larger runways. You can also see that's the ATCT is the control tower. ILS, like we mentioned, is the instrument approach, and vertical guidance is also an element of the instrument approaches at Maury. So we're trying to compare things as similar as we can. If we take the ATC column, for instance, there are 3 there that do have towers. The rest don't. Again, just similar comparison, but not perfect in some cases. So this is how the actual operations break down. The way this is coded is that if it is red, it is a 1. So it's for instance, we have B2. This would be just a 1 of any A, B, C, or D. Those are the red, then it gets darker as the aircraft get faster. And then for blue, which would be B2, and some of the aircraft I think are more of the topic of conversation here, those are in blue, and then they get darker as the aircraft get faster. So the way this breaks down is pretty similar to what we've seen in this Wisconsin airport, or excuse me, the Wisconsin airports, in that as you start to get a longer runway, it doesn't always necessarily mean more operations. Some of the other facilities actually have a large impact on that as well. So if you see BVI, it'll probably be visible on your handout versus this might be kind of difficult to read. But the 4,500 foot range doesn't necessarily increase a lot over Maury. There are a few more B2 operations, but not a very large amount. But other airports which have 4,200 or even some that have 5,000 are less than Maury. So again, it really does tie back not only to runway length, of course that is a factor, but also to additional facilities on the airport.
Could you summarize what you're trying to show? Maybe restate it?
Sure.
I heard a question to that effect.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm sorry. This is kind of a confusing chart. It's just there's a lot of information that we're trying to put in one place, so I can understand if it's not immediately intuitive. This is round 3 or 4 to try to make it clear. You should have seen the first one. But, so if you're looking at this, let's see here. So the red are the smaller aircraft, blue are bigger aircraft. Let's think about it like that. And then there are going to be up to 8 columns over each airport. So if let's take Maury for instance, because we're familiar with this one. So all the way over on the left, you can see those 4 red columns. Those are number 1, like A1, B1, C1, D1 aircraft. So smaller aircraft, and then as they get faster, the red gets darker. For the blue, that is 2 aircraft, so A2, B2, C2, D2. So you can see that.
Just size.
Right, which is the size. It's just size. The ABC is speed, the numeral is size. And so if we look at Maury here, all the way over on the left, that light blue column, that is showing us our B2 aircraft. Yes.
So if I may just summarize, what you're telling us is if an airport has a control tower and an instrument landing system, that is the lowest approach that can be done, that has a larger effect than simply runway length. And to clarify further, Middleton Municipal will never have an ILS because we don't have the clear space required for such, and I can't ever see us seeing a tower. So those 2 factors will not come into a play no matter what our runway length becomes.
Yes, thank you. And Greg is actually going to speak on that, or unless you want to now.
Sorry, Greg. Yeah, no, I really appreciate you bringing that. But the one thing I wanted to point out here is that what we're really trying to do, and what the committee has emphasized, is not introduce C2 or larger aircraft, that we want to stay B2 or under. So the whole point of this exercise was, at what point do we start seeing C2 and D2 aircraft come on the scene? And when we're looking at runway lengths from 4,000 to 5,500, comparable type airports, really you get to that 5,000 foot length and above, the C2 and D2 aircraft come on the scene. So when we're looking at that recommended runway length, our thought is if we're at 5,000, and as Rich indicated, we don't have a control tower, we don't have an ILS, you know, we can say with somewhat confidence that C2 and D2 aircraft are not going to be as easily accommodated. Now, there's no guidance on this. This is just an exercise we did to try to answer the question, you know, at what runway length do we think larger aircraft could come on? And this is just an effort to try to answer that as best we could. There's no guarantee.
So if you got an air traffic control tower and if you got ILS, yeah, everybody keeps saying that, but I have heard from one pilot who wishes to, he wishes to remain anonymous, saying, you know, pilots are all about safety, safety, safety. So you start getting closer to those bigger aircraft, and the next thing you know, pilots will be saying maybe, you know, and airport managers will be saying maybe we need these things for safety. What you're saying is this 5,000 foot runway would accommodate those larger aircraft if those things were in place. Is that correct? I just want to be really clear about this.
With the 5,000 foot runway, yes, it would be possible.
Yes.
It would be possible. What we're also trying to show is that there are other factors.
And I think what we're really trying to get at is, what is that tipping point? You know, and I think that's the question that's been raised is there a length where we can, you know, get to where those larger aircraft are going to be more readily accommodated? And that's what this whole exercise is. There's no exact science on that, but we're just trying to give some data to support where that C2 and D2 aircraft come into play.
Well, speaking of safety, I think that should be a concern for the surrounding area. Some of the area right around the airport is zoned for residential, and they've recently constructed new apartment buildings. One's right on the flight path, one's right nearby. In fact, I think one of them is a low-income housing. I don't know if HUD has signed off on that or not, but regardless, safety concerns the surrounding community, not just what's safe for pilots to land.
Agreed. In further chapters, particularly the alternatives chapter, we're going to be looking at how any changes to the runway would impact those safety zones, including the community around it. I guess just one quick point before I turn it back over to Greg, how he talks about, to talk about user surveys. But just due to the complex nature of this, and just to make sure that it's not too terribly convoluted, just want to reference back to step 8. I think that kind of illustrates the potential impact on runway length, because if you look at this slide right here, even with that 5,000 foot, and these are medium and large GA airports in the state of Wisconsin as considered by the state of Wisconsin, even with a 5,000 foot runway, that doesn't necessarily mean that operations will spike. But there are just other factors as well, like we've seen on this final slide. But I will now turn it back over to Greg, and you can certainly have more questions on this at the end, though.
Go ahead, Jim.
I have a question.
Sure.
I'm a novice, I don't fly that much, but if I have a plane that needs 5,000 foot runway, but there's only 4,000 feet, how do they not allow me to land here?
That's on you as the pilot for the most part. I mean, if you, let's say you're not based here, I'm assuming, in the scenario, you're somewhere else, you have a plane that needs 5,000 feet to take off. I mean, as a pilot, you should do your due diligence to make sure that once you land at this airport, you can get out again.
So it's really, it's up to the operator then, correct?
It is.
Operator.
I mean, as Greg said earlier, in determining this runway length and looking at what the critical aircraft in the future is, there isn't a guarantee. But if you have an aircraft that needs 5,000 feet, I mean, it's not just, it wouldn't just reflect badly on you, but you would get in trouble with the FAA for flying an airport into an airport that you can't then take off again.
Yeah, it's called careless and reckless operation. It's frowned upon. Also, your insurance company would be very unhappy with you.
That's fine. I had to ask. Thank
No,
you.
sure. Yeah, thank you.
You don't have any plans in the immediate future?
If you're flying, Jim, let me know. I want to be.
I just flew, but I've flown for 20 years, so, but not myself personally.
So I just wanted to try to summarize real quickly the things that we've looked at in considering runway length. We looked at the FAA's guidance, the advisory circular, and what results from that. We looked at how this airport sits in relationship to the overall statewide system plan and what role and classification it plays. And then we did that exercise where we tried to compare Middleton to comparable airports to try to come up with some idea of where that runway length potentially could increase, invite larger aircraft. And it's kind of getting to a length that is around 5,000 feet when we're looking at this. One of the last components is the feedback that we got from the user surveys. And this is just a quick summary. Again, a lot of the folks did say that more than a third said that the existing runway length is considered adequate for their needs. The other 2/3 had listed a desired runway length from between 5,000 to 5,500 feet. Some of them even longer. So, in looking at all,
Can I just ask?
Yep.
I mean, this is very confusing to me. First of all, it should be user surveys plural because there were 2 of them. And so this user survey summer 2018, is that the first one, the Polco one?
it is, yep.
Okay, because I look on page 60 of that survey, and between the people answering that question in the first bullet saying excellent and good, that totaled 84%, not 36.7%. So I really don't know where you're getting your data from.
No, I'm sorry.
Can
Sorry
we-
for the
can we-
third.
Can we,
but
John,
you're,
have questions from the audience at this point in time?
yeah,
I don't need comments.
right. So I guess the upshot of is we've had some folks that have identified additional runway length. Some.
I know, but I really want to know the page that you're getting this from on the survey, because when I read the survey, I don't know where 36, it's not the number. I got 84% total. And mine is on page 60. So what page are you looking at?
I can bring that survey up. Is it the survey?
From the one that has the full answers that was emailed
Okay.
days ago? You don't have the full survey in there. This has all the answers.
Sure.
Yeah, and this is.
I read it, every page.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a survey monkey.
I'm sorry, you're right, Cynthia, that was actually from the second survey. So this question 3,
Yeah, I really think
is
we
that
need
range
to
of runway
clarify,
length.
and I really think we should break out the responses of survey 1 versus the responses of survey 2 in this packet, because it's very misleading otherwise.
Okay, no, that's a good point. And I can try to zoom in on this to show it, but the question was, would an extension of the primary runway increase the use and accessibility of the airport for your needs and operations? And that chart we were trying to show was the range of responses that we received.
So this summer 2018 is survey 1?
Yes, the Polco survey.
So I'm a little bit confused here because I'm looking exactly at that, exactly what Cindy
No, what I'm,
emailed to us 2 days ago, and I'm seeing exactly what she's saying. Runway length, rate the condition, 28% say excellent, 56% say good. So how do you get that to, we need to get it up to 5,000 feet?
yeah, and
What's the leap there? I'm a little bit upset about that because
well,
most people aren't gonna go through what Cindy just went through. I looked at that and I didn't catch it. She's caught 2 things I haven't caught, and I wanna know the answer. Why is this being presented as accurate information when it is not? This is what my job is as a volunteer committee person, and I want that clarification because this is not what the survey actually showed, and it's not right. It's just not right.
yeah, and I apologize for the discrepancy. It is a little confusing, but this is the second survey. This is
But
the,
Greg, are these the assumptions though that were baked into chapter 1 and 2 forecasts and projections? That's my question.
I think the answer is, you're right. The initial survey to existing users, the answer on runway length was most of them said the existing runway length is just fine. This second survey, that was the more regional survey, the one that we have up here now, was the one that indicated and some of them did, roughly a third, the ones in green said that the runway length's just fine. The other 60-some percent indicated that runway length. So
Okay, Greg, I'm gonna respectfully disagree. I'm back on survey 1, page 55. Who filled this survey out, survey 1, Polco survey? Is your aircraft based at Middleton Municipal Airport? 43% said yes, 57% said no.
okay.
So I don't understand why you keep characterizing it as survey 1 was only people who are Maury. at Maury.
Users of Maury. Yep, not necessarily based there,
So you're
but
doing
people
the
that,
Build It They Will Come, which is the survey 2, Survey Monkey survey, and that's what you're using for all these assumptions in this packet. Is that right?
it's one factor in looking at runway length is the regional survey, but you're,
And I think you need to, for
To bring
each of
in the
these
first
things
survey?
that you're gonna put on here, I think you need to break out the answers of survey 1
Sure.
accurately, and
Yep.
not just the percentage, but it'd be nice to know how many people responded, because somewhere you have like 60%, and that was only 40 responses.
no, I appreciate that. I think you're right. We do need to include the results from the first survey as well.
So it'd be a revised version coming then?
Yep, no, I think it's a good comment, a fair comment.
I'd like to ask that this be followed up at the next meeting, and I'd like to ask that this be followed up at the next meeting, and it's on the agenda for discussion.
Sure,
Because
yep.
I really want the facts. I don't want this mistake to carry forward any further in what this committee does. I understand we're advisory, but we are, as I pointed out before, we're supposed to be coming up with a plan that we pass up along to other bodies that are staffed by government and elected officials.
No,
And for survey 2, I would really like at the next meeting, the actual states that this went to and the pilot organizations it went to.
Sure,
Very informative.
nope.
And
that's-
just a
that's-
follow-up question, both of the surveys were the same exact questions, is that right?
No.
They were
um,
different?
They were different, yeah, and, you know,
Were
that
there
was,
some that overlapped and were the same?
I mean, we asked questions about runway length, and
I was
both
just wondering if it
surveys.
would be helpful to have the questions that were the same, if they were the same group together and identified by survey?
Yeah, I think runway lengths
Just
probably
to
are
see
the
them next to
closest
each other, and
aligned.
then, as Cynthia pointed out, the number of respondents as compared to,
Yeah, and I would just add that we did post both surveys on the website, so that information's there, and if we do have something in the presentation that
I know,
conflicts,
Greg, but
those.
I will tell
yeah.
you that initially, it was posted so that you could not see all the responses, because you have to have a live feed to scroll down, for
Right.
example, question 4. So thankfully, Mark did then work with you after I asked, and that was only about 48 hours ago. And I will tell you, a lot of people aren't gonna take the time that I took to read every response and every question.
Right, and I would also add that they've been available online, that you can make an account on Polco.
I know, but it's not easy.
It's not easy, but the thing I wanted to point out is that there's also additional information about those responses on Polco that are not in that PDF. Where those people live, you know, their location from the airport. So if you go on that website, there's also additional information that can be.
Why don't you provide all of that to us so that we can have that?
I would like to add that Cynthia, what you're describing about how it's not easy to use Polko, that is actually a big reason why we felt the first survey was limiting. Because it is a system that is designed to track unique users by location, and some people who, you have to have an account, and you have to, I think it's linked to, is it social media, or how is it linked?
No,
don't
I
even remember.
actually, before
But-
anybody disclosed this survey, I found it all on my own.
I get it.
could have filled it out if I hadn't gone to question 2 and said, if you're not a Maury user or
Right.
potential user, you're out of
I
the survey.
understood, but then at the end, you're asked to, and I have not filled it out, so but reporting what I've heard, you're asked to provide identifying information, and some people aren't comfortable with that. So, anyway, I just am saying that we decided that that was a limiting way to get information. And so,
No, but they're in the minutes, and again, all I can go is by the record.
I-
The administrator asked to use POCO because you could delete on the back end with more features anybody that was an undesirable person answering this survey for your purposes. So, I understand, it was more sophisticated, you can control it better.
I'm not aware of anybody deleting any data whatsoever.
I mean, I don't know how you used it, all I know is what I read.
I wasn't involved in administering the survey, so
You weren't.
okay,
Not
so.
saying
But I agree that if there's discrepancies in the data here that's being presented, that needs to be clarified and addressed for the next meeting. No question about that.
well, and Greg, correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't the survey designed so that if they weren't a user, the rest of the questions wouldn't really be applicable? Like asking if the runway length was adequate for your uses? Which is different than the community survey we want to get out, correct?
Right, I mean, that was the intent, is the survey was geared towards users of the airport. The city has said all along that they had their own intention and still have an intention to survey the community at large, but that wasn't the focus of this survey. It was on
I
people who
really
use.
think we
and-
should do that sooner rather than later, before lines and words get on paper as a plan, even
I
if it's a
totally
draft.
agree. Can we make a motion to that at this point, or
Go
not?
ahead.
Because I am very concerned with this presentation.
Go ahead, I'll second it.
I would move that we have a community survey that encompasses all the affected regions by this master plan revision, and that we consider it before anything is put down on paper, words or plan, or sketches.
Citizen survey.
We need a citizen survey.
I'll second that motion.
We've had a motion, it's been seconded. Further discussion?
I do have a question for the group at large. The purpose of this process is to educate, to get the information out to everyone who may or may not be an airport user. Going with the survey prior to actually getting all of the presentations out does that make sense, or does it make more sense to actually listen to all the presentations, have a more informed picture, and then do the survey? Just
You could always
by
do two
curious.
surveys if you need to. Find out how the citizens who are affected feel right now, and if you need to, do a second one like you did for the pilots and the potential pilots and the bill that they will.
I'd like to amend, can somebody amend that motion? I'd like to amend the motion to say
Friendly
that
amendment.
we do those two surveys, because maybe that does have an educational component. I don't want to foreclose that, but I do think that right now, we know that we need to, we've had a lot of surveys of pilots, and we've had no surveys of citizens, and something seems
Except for
totally.
the citizeners, surveying the citizens to get
Except
some
for a
information
private
out there.
individual who surveyed citizens to get the
Thankfully.
ball rolling. But I really think that Cindy, I really do believe that this is something that should be considered as part of the planning process. I'm assuming we are part of the planning process. That's what we have been assured over and over.
It's part
that
of the
we're-
vision.
That we're supposed to be looking and planning for not just airport users, but for people who live around it, and even people who live further afield from the airport, people who might be impacted by fine particulate emissions, people who might be affected by knowledge, a lot of different knowledges that I hope will come out in the course of this, but people have perceptions and opinions right now that have never been accounted for in where we stand today.
City of Middleton, Town of Springfield residents should be surveyed right now.
Well, I've done a lot of surveys, and I am not an expert, and I would suggest that if we are gonna do a survey, we just don't, it's not a job of an intern to come up with a bunch of questions to throw out there on this thing. We really do need to have somebody that knows about how to ask the questions, what questions to ask, and so that there isn't a bias one way or the other in the survey.
Who developed the pilots surveys? Do you know?
Hunt, right?
Eden Hunt?
The POCO survey we developed with city staff, we developed with Rich. I think Ray, you were helping us and coming up with that list of questions, so.
We've got 3 to 4 able-bodied citizens. I'll volunteer to help you come up with questions.
Well, Leslie, you've done some survey work.
You guys, this is a science. I mean, people have degrees in this stuff, and you need somebody who's trained in data analysis to do this. This isn't a matter of people just throwing questions into a hat.
Yeah, that was my point. What she was saying is that it is a scientific process, and to just have some people that like to come up with questions and think they're asking the right questions is really oftentimes misleading and unhelpful.
The analysis of it.
And the analysis.
Statistical analysis is a thing. Sorry?
Well, but then you're saying, I just want to, before Leslie speaks, I just want to say, then what you're saying is that the two surveys that were previously done might not be valid.
Yes.
Because you didn't do what you're actually asking citizens
So I
surveys
just,
to do.
I want to piggyback on what Julie's saying there, and that's why I was complaining about Jade, because anyone who's ever taken a data analysis class, oh, I'm so sorry, excuse me. Anyone who's ever taken a stats class, data analysis for research, knows that you can't select your distribution like that. I mean, that's absolutely subjective, non-objective data that you get back from a list like that. And you cannot use that then as a basis to expand an airport.
To make decisions, basically.
You cannot use that. That data is faulty. The surveys that you did are faulty. You cannot use them. You have to pay a company with people with degrees in this to do this work.
Especially if you're gonna use it. And do
I
you
mean,
have,
there's
just to
the
clarify-
profession of
Okay,
statistician
okay,
is a thing.
Okay, okay.
And it can't be Mead and Hunt.
Just wait a minute.
What JetNet database?
Oh, by the way,
We have
sorry,
a
we just
motion-
looked up
wait,
JetNet.
wait.
And it's all business and
Stop.
commercial
Stop.
users.
We have a motion on the floor. We've had it seconded. We're going to have discussion among the folks here at the table. All right?
I was given a microphone. Why can't I finish? You don't want to know where Jade got her user list from? From a database of commercial and business users? Period.
Can we continue our business now?
Well, I think,
Okay.
This is part of our business.
Right.
I think that this is,
Mr. Chair, for point of order, I think that you should ask her to give her name and address for the records. Because
Yeah,
you
but we
people
just-
all know who she is probably, but I don't. But just for a
Your
matter of
residents,
record,
Jim.
I understand, but just for anybody that speaks, you should be giving your name and address.
I think we said name and town is
Name
what we
and town is
decided
what we
earlier,
decided at the
Jim.
front
That's fine.
And that's fine.
Name
But
and
so-
So we
town.
have your name.
It's for,
the record.
Leslie Hayner, Town of Springfield.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm
That's
just.
fine.
Okay, thank you,
in-
Jim.
in
Oh,
this-
I don't,
Yeah, in discussing this, Leaf, I do think it's important to say, I think it's important to bring up that we're reliant, you're presenting this user survey as very definitive, both of them as definitive of certain points that are being used to make, for us to use to make a plan. And now all at once you're saying, well, and I think it's a very good point that you made about, look, let's do these surveys properly. I think it's important. But if it's important for the citizen surveys, then it was certainly important for the pilots. And that's all she was trying to get at, is that there were some serious issues with the way that survey was written, developed, conducted, both surveys. And so before we work on, I mean, I don't know I don't know the correct order and the correct rules in Robert's Rules of Orders, but maybe there's a second amendment out there to my motion saying, at the same time, we need to resurvey pilots and do it in a correct and proper method. I
And
don't know.
determine the
Great.
proper
Okay.
distance from Maury Airport.
I don't know. I'm just raising it as something for this committee to consider.
Okay. I have go ahead, Rich.
Okay. The surveys that were accomplished through Mead and Hunt and through our group, again, meet the criteria for the FAA's data gathering, and that's primarily what this was for. If I'm misstating that, please correct me, Greg.
You know, I mean, I think we tried to use similar surveys that we've done on other master plans. We tried to, work with you, Rich, and some of the other folks to ask, questions that made sense. I don't know that there's any prescribed way to ask a user survey, but if I were to just talk about this analysis of runway length, I mean, user survey was one component. I mean, we looked at the FAA guidance, we looked at the state system plan, we did comparisons to other airports, and the user survey is one part of it. Now, you can argue that maybe we didn't ask the right questions or send it to the right people, but that's just one part of the analysis of here. So
An important part.
it's an important part.
Is there
No
FAA
doubt.
guidance on the citizen input? I've reviewed some of that stuff, and they seem to really emphasize how important it is. There's no FAA guidance on citizen surveys or input?
I guess I'm not aware of it, if there is, but, I mean, I'm certainly willing to look at that and look into that more, but I'm not aware of FAA guides on which questions to ask in the
And is
survey.
that true as well for pilot surveys or user surveys as opposed to citizen surveys? You're aware of no FAA guidance? Because I thought we were just saying that you followed FAA guidelines for doing these surveys for the pilots.
I don't know of any myself, but we can
Okay.
certainly look into that and see if it exists, yeah.
Okay,
That
so,
was my understanding.
so there's a little bit of a discrepancy between what's being said here and what's being said here.
And
So
honestly,
that's-
I don't know, I'm saying I just
sorry,
am not
trying to
aware of it.
clarify it.
So Mark, is there
Okay.
a company that you would recommend or an individual who's qualified?
I've been retired too long to remember.
Okay.
Well, Leslie, again, may have some ideas on that as far as survey. But if it turns out that the survey was faulty, that we're making decisions based upon that survey, among other things, then we shouldn't use that survey because it's giving us erroneous information. So that survey may need to be redone and done properly.
We have a
Okay.
wonderful university
Yeah,
here,
right.
a wonderful university here.
Trying to get back to it.
And they have some of the best
Trying
statisticians
to get back
probably
to
in the
it.
state, so I'm just throwing that out there. University of Wisconsin,
UW
Madison.
Madison.
I love that school, sorry.
All right, any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the
I
motion?
think you need to restate the motion.
Yes.
What is the motion, Julie?
I believe that I had moved with two amendments. I had moved that we do a citizen survey now rather than later, and revisit and do a second survey after education through this process has occurred of citizens. And then it was further amended to say that the pilot surveys, which were not done in a way that it seems to suggest that they were not reliable, also need to be redone. And I don't know if that's too much for a motion, but all of that was discussed in this last bit, and
We could make two motions and
wanna
split them
make
out.
two? Okay, so,
And I would clarify that a possible second citizen survey would be before this advisory committee concludes and adjourns its business and takes a final vote on any
so
possible
do you want me to
recommendation.
split out the stuff about the pilot survey? Okay, so my motion, I think, would be that we survey the citizens now before any further education is done, and then afterwards, when this process has occurred, before anything is written, anything is put down in any written format whatsoever, the survey should be redone, and it should be considered by this committee.
I have a question. What's the difference then between the first and the second survey?
Because Mr. Maury, Rich had made the point, and I think it's a good one, that one of the reasons we're going through this process is to educate residents about what the needs are, what's going on at the airport, as well as, I hope, address some of the things that Mr. Bartholomew had brought up before in a very committed fashion, environmental and public health concerns. And so there's gonna be an educational process through that. People's opinions and thoughts may change based on that process, and that was the reason.
The reason I'm asking, and I'm confused, is you said do a second survey before anything is written down. And so
Yes,
I'm wondering.
because it's one thing to actually redo the survey. I'd like to have the results of that second survey before we make any further, we have anything on the table about a written plan.
Am I just dense and missing what she's saying? Because can I have the committee, how about committee members? I'm taking notes from committee members. Could someone explain to me, restate the motion, please?
What
Because
I'm wondering is if you want the second survay after a draft of something is, so a survey right now.
What is the
that you want-
second survey?
Here's what
Wait, okay.
I don't know, I'm.
the logic of what I heard Julie say, I'm just gonna restate it, I'm not trying to be argumentative
No,
here.
I know you're
I
not.
heard you say, do a survey now, which is very clear. Do a survey now without going through the rest of the chapters and the alternatives analysis, that's very clear. But then you said, do a second survey before anything is written down. Before there's any further
Oh, I'm
work.
sorry, that anything's
So-
written down that we vote on. Is that a
Yes,
clarification?
that's a
I'm sorry,
Okay,
that's what
now
before we
I'm-
vote on anything, that's what.
So
I-
after a draft, so that's where I think Cynthia was saying after, so,
Yes.
but I took your comment very literally,
Yeah,
apparently.
no, it's fine,
So,
I'm glad to
okay.
clarify it, sorry,
All right.
Mark. That's the motion.
Okay.
And my second.
Yep.
In other words, do a survey now and then do a second survey like the city had originally planned after a draft plan is available, is essentially the motion, is what I'm hearing.
Right, so
Okay.
they can incorporate the first survey into this planning process.
Okay.
Just for clarity, are we asking the same questions in survey 1 as in survey 2, or are we modifying the second survey so it's 2 different sets of questions?
It would depend. I don't know why we'd have to ask the same questions again, but if we have a qualified expert in surveys, help us or do
Okay.
it.
Just curious.
I do have a question for Greg. So when we develop a master plan, the guidance that guide us in developing this master plan comes from where?
So there is an FAA advisory circular on master plans.
Developing master plans.
Right.
And in that circular, what type of public input is suggested, required.
Right, yeah, and I think it's similar to what we're doing here. I mean, an advisory committee, the open houses, the workshops. You know, I think we talked about having a public hearing. Those are all.
Oh, the public hearing, I assume, is required.
You know, I'm not sure on that.
Okay.
I guess I'd have to.
I'm just.
I read the first meeting before we were recording them, out of the, maybe it was recorded, the FAA circular or the information about robust public process. So there's more out there than what it's to be more robust.
Yeah, and I think we've done master plans where the level of public involvement has been less. We've done some where it's been more, and it really depends on what the
Level of
issues
interest,
are and
controversy, et cetera, they should have more public.
Right.
That's the
We
general
don't,
rule.
we do
Yeah.
not have to follow anything that the FAA, I mean, unless it's prescribed as something, as a hoop that we have to get through to achieve a master plan. Is that correct? I mean, as Greg just said, we can do, we're the people. We can do this master planning process in a way that we think is gonna work for everybody, is what I would say. And so far, I feel that there are a lot of people who are showing up at these meetings because they feel that the process as it had occurred previously wasn't really representative of what the community sentiment really is, and no one has taken account of it yet in this planning process. And I think that's why I'm bringing it up, to say, let us please take account of what citizens that are not pilots have to say about this before we go any further. And I'd like to have that baseline information, just like you had it for the pilots. I just think this is a basic equity or fairness issue for me.
So I think what I'm hearing is that this advisory group is moving out of the master planning process momentarily, and we're moving into the surveying process. And we will become, because I'm sure that this group is going to want to review any survey questions or anything that comes up and approve it before we're ready to move on.
Well,
Is
was
that my?
No, because, I mean, you use the survey as part of the planning process. I mean, you see the previous surveys were seen as part of the
Okay,
planning
so if
process.
someone develops
So I
a-
see this as part of the planning process.
Okay,
I
so-
don't think it would be bad to see a draft of the questions.
That's what I'm getting at,
Yes.
Cynthia, is
To
I'm
make sure that
saying
they-
that this group is going to now step aside of the master planning process, and we're going to move into a surveying process, because it sounds like that's the next step that has to happen,
That's still part
according
of
to
the
this motion. This motion will say, stop your master planning process, move into a surveying process.
I think Leaf is, I think it's just a matter of semantics. What Leaf's saying is we're taking a break from the master plan at this point, doing the survey, and then it will be
And-
incorporated into the master plan
Right,
that will
and
come
then
back.
we'll-
It's
So
just,
then
we're
we'll
not
pick up
meeting
the
again
master
till
plan.
September anyway, right? How long does the survey
well,
take together?
that's something you guys should discuss under next steps. I mean, my suggestion would be, if the motion is supported, that, we
If you're
will.
gonna do it scientifically, it's gonna take, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
Well,
I've had a little experience with surveys myself, and
We-
I know,
Yeah, so have I.
I know what, UW is a very good instrument to get your survey accomplished. So I'm very aware of what a scientific survey, just developing the questions, will take a considerable amount of effort. This isn't something that we're gonna do on the back of a napkin.
Well, we have to remember, it's a 20-year plan, so we can
So-
afford to take.
So I'm not saying that we shouldn't, I'm just saying, just so all members of this advisory group understand what you're now signing on to when we take
Well, you're
the
making it
vote.
sound very onerous, but I do not feel
It
that.
is.
It is,
Trust
no,
me.
it is,
And you already have a
And
template of a
we've already
citizen survey you can look
determined, this group has
Revised
determined that the
citizen
pilot survey is null and void. It wasn't scientific,
say both are
it
biased. We
wasn't
don't know.
appropriate, so that is going to have to be redone as well. That's my understanding.
Say the
That's what this group is telling me.
pilot survey, which said.
So when we
That's the
take this
second
vote,
motion. That's the second motion.
so, okay,
Exactly.
Mark?
No.
I guess the statement that, I haven't heard anyone say that the pilot survey is null and void. What I heard is that the data was mixed up and confused, and there should be some analysis done of it. If you're saying that, if the committee believes it's null and void, then, yeah, give us that feedback. But if you're,
That's what I've
No,
been hearing.
this is a separate motion. We have,
Yeah,
let's finish,
it's
let's
gonna be a
finish
separate
the
motion,
citizen
but that's
survey
what I'm
first,
hearing.
okay?
Okay.
Because I do think it's important to get, to gauge citizens' thoughts on this, and it has not occurred yet. And I'm not sure that waiting until the very end of the process is going to guide us. I would like to hear what people say now.
Okay, so
And
we
to-
have this first motion on the table, it's been seconded, it's been reread a couple of times, this is a citizen survey, basically. Needs to have a professional design in a scientific way, is that what I'm hearing?
And I want to emphasize that this would not just be City of Middleton, this would be other communities as well.
It's
wanna
not
say
part of
that.
my motion that it be scientific. I have heard a lot from people
Oh.
saying, design it right. I said, let's have a citizen survey and let's have a second one, and I certainly would like to see it. Personally, I would like to see some attention paid to an objective,
I can't believe that this,
unbiased survey, but I didn't put that in the motion,
I
as
can't
far
believe
as I
that this
understand
group would
it.
accept anything less than that at this point.
Well,
It's
do you
been
know, you
questioned.
said you know a UW survey expert, or you know a department, that it'd be great to utilize them.
How about this? The language, I heard the language in the motion is to develop a community survey now and then to do one again later with the questions, recognizing the questions that the rest of the planning process may inform the second survey with some different questions. I think there's acceptance of that. How about, given that that is the parameters of the motion, how about we as staff, and Minhut and I, work with the chairman and if others, like I had originally said and remain committed to this, working with the town board or town representative, Middleton and Springfield, and the City of Middleton to make sure that we develop a draft of a survey. And then that was what I had always envisioned as the community survey. Whether it has to be formally, whether we have to formally hire somebody or not, why don't you give us that latitude to look at it? Because I can assure you, given Cynthia's perspective on the airport, and I imagine the town of Springfield's, Jim, that there's going to be a lot of attention to the questions and how they're phrased. So if you can let us do that work, if that's the direction you're going, that without using the word scientific and requiring us to put out an RFP and go through that route, I would rather not have that parameter in there.
Okay, well, I was just concerned that this group may question anything that anybody does
But I think
outside of, but that's fine.
Understood,
I'm
but
okay.
Right.
Okay.
But if the chairwoman of the town of Middleton, if we're working together, I think we're.
I'll call the question. All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Abstain.
Abstain.
Thanks, Jim. Who else? Rich?
Who else abstained?
Rich, yeah, okay. Motion carries. Okay.
Would you like to finish the presentation here today, or how did you want to? And also, I kind of feel like that should have been under item 3, but how do you?
We may have another motion.
Oh, okay.
Do we have another motion?
Can we?
Well,
The pilot survey?
You left.
I am fine with the pilot survey.
I'm not gonna
Okay.
push
I
this
would
any
just like
further
more
because
information about.
Okay, so we're okay with the pilot survey?
I'm not okay with it, but I see that it's 8 o'clock at night, and I see that this meeting has now been going on for 2.5 hours without a break, and I see a lot of people that, the same thing that has worried Dr. Bartholomew from the beginning, which is, we're going through a lot of material very rapidly, and it's so dense. Everything is so dense. It's hard for me to say, oh yeah, maybe we should take the time to relook at the pilot survey.
Okay,
Certainly,
so
there
we
were
don't have a motion.
discrepancies in
frankly-
the way it was presented, and that I do want to preserve, to be presented more accurately at the next meeting. That is very important to me, because I found that those discrepancies that Cynthia pointed out are very disturbing to me.
Yeah, I think.
It's the first I've heard of
I
it.
think it's a good suggestion to maybe even put a memo together explaining the first survey, the structure, the reasoning behind the second survey, the comparison of questions. I think that might be a good thing for us to do and provide.
Yeah, and I think
so.
I agree, but it also might be a good thing to clarify which of those two figures is right, the 36% or the 86% or whatever the other, no, 84%. Which is the right one, and I wanted it, I guess I would like it in.
Didn't the FAA look at some of this data in chapters 1 and 2 and kind of pre-clear a draft?
The FAA is looking at the forecast chapter, and That is one part of the master plan that they approve formally, are the forecasts. They're looking at that now. We don't
That was
have the.
based in part on the survey data, right?
Yes, but I don't believe the survey data is not, the discrepancies we're showing here, I don't believe exist in the chapter that was submitted to the FAA. I think what we're getting caught up here, this says summer of 2018. I believe this is the later one, or Rob, you were going to clarify that.
Yeah, sorry. Just quick clarification, and we can certainly do the memo as said and provide a more thorough explanation of this. I'm sitting right under the speaker. But the 36.7%, that is of the total of respondents on this chart. So that's not saying later on
What, total of survey 2?
on this chart right here.
That's the first
That's
survey.
the point, that's a survey 1.
Is it 1 or 2?
No, this is the second
Versus the
survey.
combined.
No, summer of 2018,
There's a
that's
user
survey
survey
1.
of summer 2018,
Fall
and
of
there's one of fall of
2018 is
2018.
Okay, we're
Well,
gonna,
we can clarify it in the
suspend
memo.
survey discussion because there's too much confusion.
Good,
We're
thank
gonna
you.
allow
I think
Greg
what this really boils
to
down to is this should
clarify
have
what's
said
going on
survey
here.
number 2, and it
it's
doesn't, and it's
mislabeled.
and it's
There's
created
two
some confusion.
surveys, yeah,
Okay,
and one
okay,
of them.
okay. Can we suspend the survey discussion?
Yep.
Okay.
By the way, Greg
Agreed.
was gonna ask you, now the FAA is looking at the forecast now?
Right.
Okay, so you get a letter of approval if they do approve it, right?
Yeah, we'll get some acknowledgement of
Okay,
approval.
when we see that too, when it's done?
Absolutely. Yeah.
One other thing I was gonna mention while we're talking about the runway length that hasn't been mentioned is the runway protection zone. So actually, when you have 5,000, out another 1,000 feet, it's actually gonna be 6,000 feet we're talking about, correct?
Yes, I think maybe a graphic might be helpful.
So if you make the 4,000-foot runway, primary runway 6,000 feet, the runway protection zone goes out another 1,000 feet?
Well, it'd be total 5,000-foot runway will mean another 1,000 feet for the RPZ, the runway protection zone.
Clear zone. Clear zone.
I
Yeah,
know, so
clear
will
zone,
that
right.
whole entire thing go out then 6,000?
Right.
But it currently, under that logic, the current one goes out 5,000. Right?
Okay.
Is that what you're getting at?
Yeah,
So in other words, adding 1,000 feet.
well,
But how does that include a runway protection zone if we're going from 4 to 5?
I think what Bob is saying is that the RPZ goes out another 1,000. Is that the rate? You know this better.
Well, that's
Right,
six-
so the length of the RPZ itself, if you look on this exhibit, is 1,000 feet long. So that trapezoidal shape,
If you go to 5, so you go 4,000 to 5,000 for the actual runway extension you're proposing, and then another 1,000 for the runway protection zone goes out to 6,000.
if you could look at this trapezoid is essentially just moving over by one full length.
I know, but so it,
Where the,
the
where the,
1,000 extra feet,
mhm,
you just add that to the length of the runway.
right, yep, the
The way
The
RPZ
answer
would,
is yes.
But the way the answer is yes, but just to reiterate what Greg said, you take that trapezoid, and since it measures 1,000, and you would shift it 1,000, you know, the east side of the trapezoid would be where the west end currently is. So, in other words, it stays east of Capitol View, if that's what you're getting at.
well,
That's not what the map in chapter 1 says.
Okay.
I think that's the question she's asking, is wants to know the impact.
So
Thank
right
you.
now is the
Yes.
runway protection zone 1,000 feet from the end of the runway? Greg?
yes, that area, that trapezoid that you're seeing in gray. and I
So
can
not
zoom in.
physically on the ground, just the area that's the protection zone, not paved, right?
Right.
Right, but not an expert, but from what I've read, many of the accidents happen at the end of runways.
Yes, so that runway
That's
protection
why
zone,
there's
that
a
trapezoid,
protection zone, right?
right,
Like
yep,
people and homes and community
the gray one,
barns.
It's
right.
not just about accidents, it's about keeping a clear zone too. A clear zone so that a plane doesn't hit a tree. I mean, that's really,
well, let me read something of interest from, this was the 11/14/16 Airport Commission minutes. Speaking of the runway extension and presumably the RPZ zone, if this proceeds, it will have a substantial negative impact on the town of Middleton, town of Springfield, and the citizens of the town of Middleton anywhere in the vicinity. And having the runway located 1,000 feet closer to someone's property isn't that significant The biggest issue is the longer runway will likely attract more and different aircraft. So if you're in South Springfield or Middleton Hills, tough. I think that's what it's saying. Bring the runway located 1,000 feet closer to someone's property isn't that significant. Maybe if you have the property, it is.
Gonna finish the presentation?
Okay, we're going to suspend our discussion on the user survey, and we'll do that next time. Okay?
Not doing alternatives next
700
time.
feet.
Okay, hang on.
Correct.
Right.
Went up 100 feet because of the power lines down.
Just
Okay, is there anything more that we want to
little bit. Just finish.
discuss here?
Well, I think we need time for citizen feedback.
Look, that is going to happen.
Okay.
But let's let Greg finish whatever part of this presentation he would like to finish.
Well, we were gonna touch on the crosswind, we were gonna touch on instrument operations,
Right.
we were gonna touch on hangar area. Given the hour of the meeting, I don't know if you want us to go through that, or if you'd rather open it up to the public to discuss what we've done so far.
Well, I think it's relevant to survey responses because they were asked about these things. So I think having accurate survey information in front of us would be quite helpful to discuss those other items.
So you're
I would
suggesting that
be
we
in favor
conclude
of
the
postponing it,
presentation? Okay,
yes.
all right.
Greg, if we're not gonna touch on, instrument approaches, I just had one question as I was going through that. So
Yep.
if we do extend the runway another 1,000 feet, does that does the FAA typically push the final approach fix, in this case, CERTO for both the localizer and the RNAV? Does that push that back 1,000 feet, and what impact does that have on the 3% glide slope? And
Yes.
how does that, relate to
Right.
Meadow Rue Lane up there, which is probably,
It's a
1,070.
good question, yeah. So that airspace, just like the RPZ, starts at a distance 200 feet off the end of the runway and slopes up at a 20-to-1 slope. And you're right, if we move it out another 1,000 feet, that's just starts further, and so that airspace drops by that same amount. So yeah, it'd be lower over those properties to the west. And one of the things we are doing as part of this scope is we are doing an analysis of obstructions through what's called an airport's GIS process. It's something the FAA requires. So we are flying there, and it's already been done. There's been an aerial survey to pick up trees, pick up obstructions, pick up how that airspace relates, and we have to show that on an AOP and on the master plan. So we'll have a good handle on how that airspace relates to the ground and the trees and other features off to the west there.
Where will that be in the alternative section, or is that in some other section?
Yeah, we could start looking at that now. I mean, our hope or our thought was to really try to figure out a runway length that made sense before we start looking at alternatives and looking at airspace. Otherwise, we're looking at a large combination, and I think we wanted to try to get some length that made sense and evaluate that. But yeah, same with noise. Evaluating noise is a pretty involved process. We'd ideally like to have a good consensus on the runway length that we're going to evaluate when we evaluate future noise conditions.
Excuse me, I have I just want to interject right there. I think people need to know what the noise would be like if it was longer and what it's like now. So why would we just focus on decide on a runway length and then go from there? I mean, to me, that doesn't make any sense in terms of
We'll always
planning.
look at the existing noise.
I'm very,
We'll always look at the existing condition, but looking at.
How are you doing that, though? You're not actually taking noise measurements or knowing how many planes are actually flying in what
Very
direction,
confused about what you're
every
saying here.
15 minutes, sometimes 7 days a week. It's uncontrolled. It's an uncontrolled airport.
Right, and Rick Dunkelberg was at the last meeting. He talked a little bit about, the FAA has a model that we use, and there's a process for doing that. And he couldn't be here tonight, but he could talk more intelligently on how that model works and how that system's set up to
And I
determine
also
those
wanna
noise
make the
contours.
point that just because the FAA doesn't require something, doesn't mean we have to go for the lowest possible checkbox. This is a community where people live and they love where they live, and they don't wanna see it substantially negatively impacted.
I was gonna
Okay.
suggest that, if we're gonna postpone, can we establish a next meeting date with the provision that we'll continue on with Greg's presentation and, about the extension? And perhaps that'd be a time also when we might start getting into some other issues. It might be noise. Though I really think we've got some important issues, whether it's noise or public health. We need separate sessions for each one of those. Those are complicated, they're important, they have long-range ramifications, and we need separate sessions. Again, we're not in a hurry.
And I guess I would like to add to this. I know you said, well, it's gonna be a much more unwieldy process and you're gonna have to look at a lot more things. Well, I think that's the sense of this community might be different than other communities you've been in. The sense of the community where I live and the people I'm supposed to represent want a much fuller exploration. They want the time taken, and I think I think that's actually very important if you're really talking about bringing the public in. And I really, I just have to agree with what Dr. Bartholomew is saying 100%. I think we need to talk about the way it's scheduled. I also think in relationship to that, this idea of making one agenda item so that we had to go through the whole thing before citizens could talk was extremely difficult for the citizens. And I would like to ask that if we're gonna have a presentation of a whole chapter, that we take appropriate pauses within this. And I know that you have an agenda, in this agenda, it's like, even now, I don't know when we're supposed to be discussing things like this. If we're supposed to let the public speak first, or if and then provide guidance with regarding this chapter. Well, that's one of my biggest guidance tips that I would say is pause and let people interact, because it's way long. This has been a very lengthy process.
Been a citizen request to interact. May we entertain that, Chair?
I think what Julie is suggesting is good, to have a
Community
break
is
in
still-
between. We've got people who probably have kids at home and whatever, have other duties they have to do. So if we cover our section, take a break, give people a chance to speak to that particular discussion, move on, then citizen input, I think that's better, particularly for people who have to leave and like to say something.
I think part of the reason that it was chosen to try and do a comprehensive, complete chapter was that elements of this chapter build on each other, and without a full description of, like when Greg was talking about runway length, if he would have just talked about one element there, and it doesn't really, you need to fit all of the elements together to make it make sense. And that's why we were looking at moving through the entire chapter, so that it was a comprehensive concept that then people could take in and digest, rather than piecemeal it and possibly ask questions that were going to be answered anyways later on in the presentation.
Well, we could have segments though, user and citizen feedback. Runway
I'm just
extension.
explaining why, the
I know.
logic behind why we did what we did.
Sure,
It
but
was
I'm
to
just-
give everybody an opportunity to see the full layout of, for example, the runway length, what all goes into it.
Yeah.
Instead of going, talking about plane weight, and then, okay, give me your input on plane weight. It didn't lend itself well to breaking it up that way.
Well, again, I think you could do the analysis, then get into the comparison with other airport. Why I've selected the B2 here as a critical, whatever the airports have done. Okay, then take a break, then go into something else.
Yeah, well.
Well, anyhow, that's.
That's not here now. That's the way that's our approach. Any other discussion that the committee would like to have at this point? Sure, Jim.
I just wanted to thank Middleton and the committee to allow us to have two representatives on this. I think it's important that we have a chance for our citizens to talk, and I'll probably be having, some type of a public forum in my own town for my residents, but our board would like to wait till you're, have a little bit more nuts and bolts put together of your plan before we can respond to it, but I would ask that we're able to do that. But One of the things that I wanted to bring up, and it, maybe Dan has already addressed it, but I would like that, if it's possible, I think it would be nice to have in your plan that if you do plan on doing future airport expansions, that the city would not use eminent domain to do it. I know that your former mayor and I had discussions when we did our 20-year growth agreements, and, you know, I don't even remember if it actually made it on paper, but it was a gentleman's agreement that in the areas that would be annexed onto the city for future growth, that they would not use a condemnation process in order to take the lands. And I would hope that for any community, whether it's mine or others, that Middleton would consider that, because, I mean, I give you credit that you're giving everybody a chance to talk, and you're never gonna get 100% consensus. I know that, I've been in politics for years, but again, I wanted to thank you, but I just wanted to bring these points up in case Dan has not had a chance to do it.
Okay.
I would like to echo Jim's request and comments as well from Town of Middleton. Thank you, Jim.
I'm sure that the city would consider it.
Thank you.
Yep.
Are we talking about the scheduling now, or where are we exactly? Because I want to try to give people some
Well-
guidance about where we're going with the idea that Bob had.
Well, I think we're at a point where we need to allow citizen input for
Okay,
item
fine.
2.
And then do the
And then
scheduling.
we'll go to
Okay.
scheduling.
Great.
So I will open it up now to any comments the citizens that are present here would like to make. And please step to the microphone and state your name and location. Thank you, Mark.
I ran up here first, so my youngest daughter turned 13 today, and I haven't been home since 7 o'clock this morning. So I would like to just say a few things. My name is Pam Krill, and I'm a resident of the town of Springfield. I really wanted to say 3 things. I think one of the reasons why people are so passionate about this is because we love this part of the state. We love the Middleton area. We think we have a wonderful school district, and we want to keep it the way it is. We're not anti-growth, we're not anti-business, we're not anti-airport. We just feel that, you know, the airport as it is right now is fine. I mean, I actually think it's a nice little airport. It's got great character. I think it adds something to the community. I don't really want to see it get any bigger. And I think a lot of us feel that way. And we really value our community, and that's why we're all here. So that's number one. The second thing I want to...
Excuse me, could I ask you a question?
Sure.
When you say you don't want to see it become any bigger, what does that mean? More flights, longer runway? When you say you don't want to see it get any bigger, what do you?
I personally don't want to see the footprint any larger, which means larger runway, more planes, more space, more whatever that was called, the AVP, the protection zone. I forgot what it was called, but RTZ.
Runway protection zone.
Yeah, I mean, I totally understand all the arguments for, wanting a longer runway for safety and all that kind of stuff, but I guess I'm coming at it from, there's all these homes and schools and people all around this airport. This is not out in the middle of nowhere.
Okay, thank you for clarifying.
So, and again,
Go ahead.
it used to be, but it isn't anymore.
Right.
Okay, so that was my first point. My second point, I'm an attorney. I think I mentioned that at the top. And I work with corporate boards. I don't work with groups like this, so this is all new to me. However, at the top of the meeting, there was a discussion about conflicts of interest. And when I work with boards where there is a conflict of interest, a direct conflict of interest, and primarily it's a financial one, typically the people who have that conflict of interest can participate in the discussion, but they can't vote. And so I think somebody mentioned that, and it was, I believe it's going to be on the next meeting agenda. But I do think that that's really important for this group to consider, because you want to make sure that whatever you vote on, it's legitimate and people view it as a legitimate decision. And if you have people who are whose vote actually counts towards that decision, I think it delegitimizes the decision a little bit. And again, I'm speaking from a corporate perspective. I have no idea what the rules are here. I believe there is a code of ethics in Middleton that talks about financial interests. I didn't get into all the particulars of it, and even if a person isn't technically disqualified. I just think, you know, from a perception and optics perspective, I think it makes a lot of sense to have those people recuse themselves from the vote. I don't think they should be taken off the committee because I think their viewpoints are important, but just when it comes to the actual voting, I think that's really something that, that should be taken into consideration. Because we do it in the corporate world, and I would expect nothing less in this public format. And then the third point I want to make is, you know, there's been some discussion about, well, you know, this group is just here to kind of, you know, look at the Mead and Hunt studies and, you know, look at what's presented, and, you know, we're really not deciding anything, but you are deciding something. Whatever you decide, you know, once you get all the data from Mead and Hunt and a plan is prepared, you will either approve it or not approve it. And if you approve it, it'll go to the next level, which I believe is the Airport Commission. And then after the Airport Commission gets it, it'll either go to the Common Council or whoever else gets it after that. But they're going to really rely on whatever decision that you all make, because look at all the time that you're spending on this. I mean, they're not going to spend that kind of time. That's what this body is for.
Point of clarification, we'll recommend.
You'll recommend it,
And
but you know
so will
what?
the Airport Commission, they'll
Right.
recommend.
But you know what?
The
Your
City Council will approve.
Oh, and that's fine. But I guess my point is that they are going to take your recommendation pretty much at face value, to be perfectly honest. Because look at all the time. They're not going to spend this kind of time. They're not. That's why this body was created. So your job is really important, and I think you all know that. But there's just been some discussion about, well, we're not deciding anything. You are deciding something. So I just wanted to make that clear. And that's all I have to say.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And as we agreed last time, we'll limit the discussion to 5 minutes an individual.
That'd be fine, but then I would ask that we don't interrupt the person while they're speaking with questions unless you're gonna add on to that time, okay? Like just occurred.
Sure, we can do
Thank you.
that.
Yeah, she was over. I'm just saying for.
No, she's well under 5, I think.
Go ahead.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Leslie Hayner, Town of Springfield. You guys know me now. So a couple of quick comments. First of all, I just want to comment, just so everybody knows, I have a master's degree in applied science. I have a lot of education in statistical analysis and research methods. And so I'm the author of that survey, and I just wanted to clarify that for everybody, because there was a comment made about surveys being written on the back of a napkin, and I just wanted to clarify that my survey was not written on the back of a napkin. So one other thing I want to just mention really quickly is I attended the Airport Commission meeting the other night, and there was some discussion of the 1998 resolution that the city would not seek to do the very things that are likely to come out in this master plan. And one of their own commissioners pointed that out to the commission and said, the city's breaking a promise, the city made a promise, they're breaking the promise. And I just wanted to make everybody aware of Chair Halleck's response to that was, well, what's the life of a promise? And because I know that meeting wasn't well attended, I just wanted to make sure that people heard that that statement was made, and it was made in front of a room of 40 people or whatever. So I just, I think that contributes to the discussion in terms of what's the vision for this airport. I know that that's been mentioned a number of times. People want a vision defined, and that makes it sound to me like there's a vision out there for that. They were aware of that issue that was going to come up, and he was prepared to say something about it. So, yeah. So last thing I want to talk about, I'll move quickly, is I wanted to find out if the committee and if anyone in the audience had seen this helpful document, the 2018 Wisconsin Airports Rates and Charges Survey. That was helpfully sent to me by somebody at the city. It has a lot of awesome data in here, really great points that we could probably use to help make a decision on whether or not we need an airport expansion here. So I think that this is data that perhaps Mead and Hunt should incorporate into their work, or maybe the committee should look at themselves. This was just published by BOA in June. Lots of great data in here. Among it, we keep hearing from the city of Middleton that Morey Airport is actually one of the more expensive airports in the state in terms of costs for pilots. This report actually reveals that that's not the case. Private hangar lease rates at Morey are 2 categories lower than at MSN. Morey also does not charge landing fees here, where 4 other large general aviation airports in the state do. I called and asked some questions about it, and I was told they're fee-free because they want to be nice. But you can imagine there's a lot of lost revenue there. So I think that when we're talking about wanting to improve this airport to make it more profitable and make it work harder for the city, I think we have to look at things like that, where you know, why aren't they generating revenue now? They're leaving money on the table. So I mean, hundreds of thousands of dollars a year that could be generated there. Something else that was really interesting in this survey they did of airports in the state is that the 8 nearest airports to this area, including MSN, Sauk Prairie, Waukesha, Janesville, and some others, all have available hangar space. C-29 is the only airport in this corridor that does not have available hangar space. So when we talk about demand, we talk about a waiting list for hangar space. There is space out there to accommodate people with planes. There are other airports very near to here that people can put their planes at. So I just want people to be aware of that when it's always about, well, there's demand, there's so much demand here. Well, there's also space. Also, I want people to know that C-29 currently has, is it 61 hangars, Mr. Maury? Where are you guys at? In any event.
A little less than that.
Okay. You are in the second highest category of numbers of hangars on a facility campus in the state. There are only 2 other airports in this state that are in the next category up. So what that means is if this airport expands and builds even just a handful of more hangars up in that northeast corner, we will be one of 3 airports in this state with more than 70 hangars. That's more than Milwaukee, and it's more than Dane County. We will have 70 hangars on that campus. And an international airport in Milwaukee doesn't even have that many. So you have to ask yourself, how does that fit into this little tiny boutique regional airport that we need 70 hangars? It'll be more than 70. It's just the final category in that hierarchy is 70 and more. So it's anything over that. So I just want to make people aware of, and I can send this link out to this document if anyone would like to see it, but there's a lot of great data in here that I think should be taken into consideration.
How about giving it to Hunt?
Sure, I would love it.
Can you incorporate that as an attachment somehow in your report?
Happy to look at that and look at that in relationship to facility requirements.
I mean, the issue for me is this. You guys are citing demand. That's why we need to expand. And what I'm saying is, I think to some extent that demand has been artificially created. You have not raised hangar lease rates for 16 years at this airport. You have, you don't charge landing fees. So of course, I want to fly into the place that hasn't raised rent in 16 years and doesn't charge me a landing fee. I mean, this demand, I think, is somewhat artificial, and I think that needs to be looked at before it's used as the basis for this expansion.
Thank you.
I know I don't want to start a debate.
No,
There's a couple clarifications.
Sure, go ahead and clarify, Rich.
It comes from BOA, Teresa, can't that be incorporated into your report?
I would just say it's not uncommon to include comparison of rates and charges to other airports as part of a master plan. The other thing we are looking at is the capital improvement program, you know, how anything that comes out of this master plan, how it would play out, how it would be funded, and that would be a part of that. I think that'd be a place to put that.
Well, even the comments that she's got about the number of hangars and the other information she just presented, I think could be indicated as part of the report.
Yeah, we could touch on that. I mean, I think when you look at airports like Milwaukee and stuff, I mean, they're really not intended to service private, you know, small general aviation. So I think we have to kind of look at that comparison in regards to what the airport's doing.
Say it again, Greg.
stuff.
They're not intended to be serving as private. What did you just say?
Well, I mean,
private general aviation.
commercial service airports.
Private general aviation.
Private hangars, general aviation, you know, it's, we can touch on that, I guess, and evaluate, you know.
I see
Okay, sure.
I just want to clarify this so that this doesn't linger, because sometimes that happens with our debates when we have different terminology. Greg, what I heard you say is that Milwaukee doesn't accommodate private. What he meant is that people like anyone who's based, most people who are based at the airport here are private citizens. They're not doing commercial activities, like a flight school.
Page 22, private hangars on the airport. Milwaukee is in the third, somewhere in the bottom.
Right, but the point I'm trying to make is there's a lot of conflicts, and Rich can back me up on this, but there's a lot of conflicts with having a plane that flies 90 miles an hour, 110 miles an hour at Dane County Airport, which also has jumbo jets and military flying at a far different rate. So my point is, and Rich, maybe you can help me out, is that that creates a mix in aircraft that is very uncomfortable and a lot of tension between small planes and large planes.
But the flip
And-
side of that is, what that means is pilots who don't feel that they're skillful enough to be flying into an airport and competing for airspace with large jets are using our airport. So that means we're getting the less skilled pilots flying over our homes.
I don't agree with that at all.
Yeah, that's.
Okay, wait, Rich, is there something you wanted to clarify here?
I did. If you look at that, and I actually generated the information and sent that into the state for this. I do that on an annual basis. The actual number of hangars at our airport, you look at, well, anyway, we have multiple units that are often counted a little differently, but the actual number of buildings in the neighborhood of 48. If you would also look at that study, tell me where the nearest airport is that charges a landing fee. Madison doesn't, Sauk Prairie doesn't, Lone Rock doesn't, Janesville does not. No one in this area charges a landing fee. There's no reason to charge a landing fee. Also, what that report does not say is that the Middleton Municipal Airport operates in the black. We do not have to be subsidized by a sponsor in order for our daily operations. Therefore, our revenues that we're bringing in are more than sufficient for our operations.
Okay. Yep. Jim?
I just wanted to make a point that maybe you could take Pam's information and just give it to the committee to read. That way Dan will have something to do when he gets back from vacation.
Leslie? You mean Leslie, right?
I'm sorry, Leslie's information, and she can,
I have
provide it to
absolutely
the-
no objection to that. It's a public record.
No, I understand. I'm just asking that it be distributed to you so everybody gets a chance to read it.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right.
Kyle Larson, Town of Springfield. And part of what I wanted to say is piggybacking off of Leslie's data. Because I feel like city and Mead and Hunt is talking out of both sides of their mouth quite a bit. We keep hearing that you're emphasizing that you're not looking to increase jet size or volume, and yet every proposal that you're making has quite a large impact on the size of jets that can fly in and the traffic that can fly in. If you open it up to people who can fly in during inclement weather, that increases traffic. If the runways are longer, like we've stated a number of times, it's anybody who can fit their jet onto that runway can do that. So if you increase runway size, period, you're increasing the volume and the traffic of the airport. That's just a given. So being told over and over again that that's not what we want to do feels very disingenuous. Especially with the data that was just put up there, in addition to Leslie's, we're already ranking number 8 of all of the flights that are or higher, we're ranking number 8 with only the 4,000-foot runway. You increase that runway, do we really need to be higher than number 8 in the entire state if we're looking to make sure that this stays a small regional airport that primarily services the needs of recreational and private citizens? And this is where I feel like, again, talking out of both sides of your mouth, when you do the survey, when you're only using JetNet data, JetNet is specifically, just looked it up, it's the ultimate source for information and intelligence regarding the fleet and market for business and commercial aircraft. So that second survey wasn't even going out to people who were using it privately and recreationally. The data set that they were using is commercial, it's business, and that seems very obviously what the city is looking to improve. Is they're looking to improve that corporate and that business traffic that's coming in here, and it's disingenuous to say anything but, because that's everything that you guys have presented it, and you're doing it in a way that makes it seem like it's not, and I resent it. Got a lot more to say, but I want to go home, so I'm going to shut up.
I just have to make a comment that that's an incorrect statement on JetNet. It actually tracks every operator, whether it's private or business. So a lot of private operators do register their aircraft into business names, LLCs, corporations. So that is an incorrect statement.
From JetNet?
No, from you.
I'm reading it off of their website.
Thank
I
you, Jade.
understand, but I don't know that you know how airplanes are registered a lot of times, so I'm just trying to correct that.
It would be nice if that was clear in the survey data, when you're talking about a sample set for your survey data, be clear about who you're surveying. And that's not clear at all in that second survey. That looks very cherry-picked. When you go out and you choose who to survey, you're generating data based on what you want it to say. It's biased and it's invalid.
Thank you for your comments.
My name is Dan Reckley, Town of Middleton. I actually,
How do you spell your name? Sorry.
Roekle. I actually live in the neighborhood that directly touches the airport. And I've been here for 3 hours and I've not heard one comment about all of the comparisons that have been made to other airports. Not one of those comparisons mentioned an airport that touched the neighborhood and had 2 schools within an eyesight. I mean, you could throw a ball and hit one of the schools with, 150 kids in it. So I would ask the committee to also take that into consideration when we're looking at other comparable airports that are of size and flights coming in and all of that. Those airports, maybe they're the same, I don't know, but maybe they'd be out in a field with no impact. I've lived where I have for 15 years. Our neighborhood has, I think, been good neighbors with the airport up to this point. And I'd like to keep it that way, even though flights have doubled, supposedly, right? I can tell you every day, planes fly over my house where I can see the pilot. And that probably comes as part of being a training airport, right? I know that the recommendation is that they're not supposed to buzz houses and whatever, but we've stated over and over again that there's no way for us to impose those restrictions. Time of day flights, no way to impose those restrictions. This airport touches a neighborhood, and as we expand it and those flights go up, which they will, all of the data that was presented clearly states that the use is going to go up. The neighborhood that is directly touching the airport is going to be impacted, and I would like the committee to make sure that they consider that. And not only Middleton Hills was thrown out, Pete's sake, you can't even see Middleton Hills. Like, let's talk about the houses that are right next to that airport. Let's talk about the school right next to it and another school that's at the end of this crash zone or whatever, the zone at the end of the the runway. So anyways, that's the Montessori school. Yeah.
I find it a little offensive to call it a crash zone. It's the
Somebody-
runway
somebody-
protection zone.
Protection zone. Somebody referred to it as that. I'm sorry.
But the school's not next to it either, so let's.
I believe the Montessori school is.
900 feet from the fence on the playground.
I'll add to that, I live in
Not lined
Middleton
up with
Hills, and on the flight path, and they come in, and they create a lot of noise, and they come in over Northside School, which also would be another school.
It'd be a third school. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Can we have people come up? Our sound person is saying that if people want to comment from the audience, could they just please come up, because he can't get it on the video. Is that what you were just saying? Yes. Okay. So I love everybody to come up and talk so that we can hear it on the tape.
Hello, I'm Joan Ziegler from the town of Middleton, and there are a couple of questions that I have, and that is why our goals are what they are, why we want to be a large versus a medium size, why we want B2 versus A1 or whatever, the smaller size. When you had that chart up and it showed number of planes, it seemed like the red were much larger than the blue. Why would the goal be to shift that? Just wonder what our priorities, what's based that priority of growth.
Thank you.
Is there any answer?
I guess the short answer I would say is that the goal is not to change the largest grouping of aircraft that are here now, that B2 is what the runway was designed for, the airfield was designed for, those standards. The goal is to stay within that, but to accommodate those safer and more easily.
But they're not the primary user, looking at that chart?
There's a variety of users. I mean, they're the largest that operate here now. They're on that larger end. But you're right. I mean, it's a decision that the committee and the city have to make is, do we want to accommodate
So weren't the
them more?
red ones much higher number on your chart? Like when you had that blue-red thing, bigger planes versus?
Yeah, I think the red were on the smaller end, the A1. Maybe I'm wrong. I
No.
can bring that back here. This is the graphic we're talking about, right?
Right.
Aren't
we the C29 with the big red?
Yeah, C29 is.
And the blue is quite a bit
Middleton.
smaller?
Yeah, and if you look at the bottom right-hand corner, it's A1, B1, C1, D1. Those are kind of progressing from smaller to larger aircraft.
Right, and
So-
aren't there less of the bigger aircrafts then if the red is higher?
You're right. I mean, the biggest operator at C29, and again, this is just looking at instrument operations. It's not reflective of all the operations, but the biggest column there is the B1.
Biggest meaning?
The tallest column under Middleton in terms of instrument operations is.
So what's the red then? That B? Oh, B1, right.
B1,
But you're
yeah.
trying to gear for B2, right?
B2 is all the way to the right. That's
And
the
that's
largest.
the second.
That's the second highest, yeah. But we're talking about just instrument operations. These are not the total operations. So if you look.
But you'd see more of the smaller planes without instrument
if
than
we
the
looked
larger.
Exactly. If we looked at the overall.
So when we look at the use, there's more use by smaller planes than big planes. Why would we want to shift that?
And that, that's something we'll have to decide, is do we want to accommodate those B2 more readily? Yeah.
Thank you.
Catherine Wolf. I live at 4931 Hickory Trail, and my address is Middleton. We have seen a huge increase in plane traffic over our house. Our whole neighborhood out there with the 6-acre greenway, which is actually, we're technically citizens of Springfield, but we have a Middleton mailing address. And the other day I counted 30 flights that buzzed our house. And I was out working in the yard. 30 times a plane came over.
Where are you on Hickory Trail?
Hickory Trail?
Yeah, whereabouts? Further?
Well, it's in the
closer to
Enchanted
airport
Valley
or
subdivision.
I know it, but
Oh, okay. Well, it's got the,
airport? I mean, closer to,
well, we're 4 miles from the airport. So we're off of Airport Road. Sagebrush connects with Hickory,
got it.
turns into
Thanks.
Hickory Trail.
Thank you, sorry. Sorry.
And
Okay.
30 flights close over the trees. I guess it's a lot of fun for the students to do, but it's not very fun for residents. And that 6-acre greenway is supposed to be a protected area. So we had 2 barred owls, we had a screech owl, we've got a lot of wildlife that uses that. And I think the environmental impacts, besides the noise and all of the possible pollution coming off the planes when we're out working in our yards. But I think the environmental assessment, when I talked to, I forgot your name, from Mead and Hunt, you said the environmental assessment was going to come quite a bit later in the process. I think that needs to be happening now. It needs to be independent and needs to be comprehensive so that we really look at the impacts on the people who live there, but also the whole natural world in that area. There's a lot of natural beauty out there. I know the Airport Commission, this is not a priority for them. I spoke at the last meeting, and the chair said, we're looking at 22 million in expansion. He said that during the meeting. Where is that in this process? And what a thing to say after everyone just testified about we've got a bad neighbor from the airport now because they're just allowed to buzz our house. When I talked to the owner of Capital Flights, he said there's nothing we can do about it. But we can't control the pilots. So 30 times in one day having our house buzzed doesn't feel reasonable to me. And I'm not against a small airport. It's very quaint. I like it. But if we're just going to be treated disrespectfully and just told, your feelings don't matter and we're going to do whatever we want, why is Capital Flight continue to have this spot at our airport? And an expansion with more traffic, Airport Road is a mess. Trying to get back and forth during rush hour is crazy. Time? Okay, well, anyway.
Thank you.
I would add to that, the incoming flights come in over Pheasant Branch as well. Pheasant Branch Conservancy.
Anybody else from the okay, go ahead.
My name is Deb Newman, and I live in the town of Springfield. And I wasn't planning on speaking today, but I just felt like I had to comment because I feel like sometimes maybe some of you think that we're just opposed to airport expansion because we're afraid of something that's going to happen. But I've lived in my house for 15 years. We built here, we moved here. I love the airport. My husband was once a recreational pilot. Love it. But what I'm concerned about, and what maybe some of my neighbors are concerned about, is that there has been a distinct change in the past few years. It's not just the little airplanes anymore, it's the jets. And it's the jets that fly over at 10 to 6 when you've got your windows open and you think, what the heck is going on? Or 10 to 10 at night. And or very low, so even when my husband keeps me in check from saying, wasn't that too low? And he said, no, that probably is fine. But when he even said, I could see the people's faces in the windows, that's the sort of stuff that we're dealing with, and that is, for some of us, just giving us a bad feeling about what we're going to have to put up with if there are more jets, bigger airplanes, and more of them. Because it's disruptive to our semi-rural life that we chose. We share the road with bikes. We share the road with farm equipment. We're happy to do it. We've shared our airspace, but it's getting a little bit intrusive at this point, and that's what concerns me about an expansion.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Steve Ziegler, Town of Middleton. Time for a little history. It was stated earlier that the city of Middleton passed a resolution in 1998 not to seek to extend the main runway past 4,000 feet. That was in behalf of having the city and a referendum resolution getting that passed. The city passed the airport and put it in. The city at that time, to put the airport in, gave up a tax base from a commercial development for that property of rated in 1998 of a little over $110 million without TIF financing. $110 million without TIF financing in order for the airport to be a part of the municipality of the city of Middleton. I think it was I am not saying anything bad about that, but the resolution of the city of Middleton at that point was, and I remember Mayor Dan Ramsey standing up in front of everybody and indicating that there would never be a jet out of there because it would never be over 4,000 feet. There was never a resolution to that, but he made darn clear that he said it, and which is fine. I understand. The key thing of that airport was to, one, very importantly, have safety, which the existing Maury Airplane Company at that point was not necessarily up to speed, I believe, would be a good way to put it. The 4,000-foot runway really accomplished that. And I think the city made clear that that was an extremely important priority. The city made clear that it was an extremely important priority to maintain a good relationship with the flight community, with the training facilities of an excellent training facility of Maury and the field, and maintaining that into the future. and giving kids and people the opportunity to fly small planes close to a municipal facility like Madison, that was accomplished. The Friends of Fresh Branch Creek got on board and said, this airport will be a positive thing for the watershed of Pheasant Branch Creek, that the commercial development and the economic status that the city was usurping and not letting development would be well advised, that the Friends of Pheasant Branch Creek and many of the neighbors and people of Middleton all agreed that it was very important to do that. Significant expansion of the airport in the floodplain at this point, especially with the flooding going on, is a serious concern that has not been addressed and will not be addressed until after this report of Mead and Hunt is finished. That is a little disturbing to me. The key thing that the city of Middleton really wanted with this airport, and that got driven, of course I was on the opposition, I got it, but it got, I really learned it, and they accomplished it, was that they could accommodate med flights for the university hospital system, which is on the west side of Madison, and that it was set up so that they could have transplants come in and out of there with a 4,000-foot runway that would accommodate that much quicker than ferrying things from Dane County. That was accomplished. It was the intent of the city of Middleton to accommodate the business community and being able to bring in larger planes and to drive economic development, to offer more hangar space, to have a new airport facility, so that the businesses and the TIFs and things like that could be developed out. That was accomplished. Now we're looking at wanting to take and expand a runway. 5,000 feet keeps being brought up, and you know what? 5,000 feet going to the west is going to destroy my community. And I can say, I'll end it now, I can see you're getting very anxious up there, but sometimes history takes a while. The key thing is that I will say it again.
Keep talking, please.
The key thing is, I will say it again, I've said it 2 times already, is that myself, my neighbors in the town of Middleton, my neighbors in the city of Middleton that all live along Airport Road are absolutely scared to death of a 5,000-foot runway or anything that is larger than 4,000 feet, as it will condemn a significant amount of my neighbor's land, some of my land, and destroy our community. And I would really need to express that this 1,000-foot thing that's been battered around like a tennis ball all night long is a pretty significant thing for our neighborhood. Thank you for the time.
Thank you.
Good neighbors don't condemn other neighbors' property.
Anyone else?
My name is Michelle Lewis. I live in the town of Middleton. I want to talk for just a minute, a couple of minutes, about something that affects all of us that will come with an airport expansion. And it's been discussed or touched upon in the last meeting. And that's the lead that is emitted by the smaller aircraft that are flying in and out of Maury Airport. Lead in the environment never decomposes. It builds up over time. 100% of lead emissions in Dane County come from piston aircraft, such as those flown out of our airport. 300 billion micrograms of lead per year, that's 300 billion, are emitted by smaller aircraft here in Dane County. 5 micrograms is the level set by the CDC as high blood levels in children. The flight paths of aircraft emitting lead include Sunset Ridge Elementary, Northside Elementary, Westside Christian School, Middleton Community Montessori, PK through 8, Clubhouse for Kids 2, Primrose School of Middleton, Wisconsin Child Care Improvement, Kiva Sports, Middleton United Soccer Club, West Middleton Youth Baseball and Softball Organization, the Middleton Pool, Middleton High School, and Cromrie Middle School. There is no safe blood level in children. Even low levels of lead in the blood have been shown to affect IQ, ability to pay attention, and academic achievement. And the effects of lead exposure cannot be corrected.
Thank you. Go ahead, Rich.
The EPA allows a certain amount of lead to be in non-leaded fuel as well, auto gas.
I'm sorry, but I am gonna have to respond, Rich. The two main sources of lead in the air and in the ground, it's in the EPA reports, they are from aviation fuel and mineral, firms that are using lead in their manufacturing processes.
According to the EPA,
That's what the EPA says.
as records are kept, 100%.
Mike, the mic, we can't hear you.
Gotta do the mic.
Gotta do the mic.
According to the EPA report, the annual report that they do about lead, that it's required that records are kept, 100% of the lead emissions in Dane County come from aircraft.
Thank you. Anyone else? Otherwise, we're going to move on to item 3, next steps and schedule.
I've got a comment then on it. I had mentioned before, and some other people have touched on it, there are some issues. The economic impact report apparently is coming sometime soon. Each of those things, such as that, public health, we just touched on that, noise, we talked about that, should be separate items on a separate meeting. For me, once a month, which is more than probably most people want to attend. Each of those monthly meetings should be focused on one of those particular topics. And we should set up a schedule, so we know that. We know in advance, we can plan our schedule. We have to watch out, though, for the winter months. So what we may want to do is suspend any meetings of the committee. I know we're all from Wisconsin and so forth, but between mid-November to the end of January, that's the holiday season. People are busy doing other things, and not having formal meetings during that time. There can be communication, send out reports, send out whatever. People can look at them, maybe even respond if they want to, via so forth. But I don't think formal meetings should be held between those particular dates, mid-November 2019, end of January 2020.
Thank you. Mark or Greg, as far as schedule, I know that we added an extra or another committee meeting, but is there anything, or do we want to, is there anything you guys want to add?
Well, we had talked about our next meeting originally under the schedule at the start of the meeting. We had talked about having the next meeting September 26th. But given the addition of the community survey process at the taking a break, as you mentioned, to do that, if we, as outlined earlier, feel that, we're going to discuss that over the next couple of days, and if there's a need for another meeting in August, perhaps we could schedule for, let's say, the 4th Thursday of August. I'm just picking a time. But working with you, Mr. Chair, since you're duly elected by the committee to help guide these decisions with the input that we got tonight from several members about agendas and requests for agenda items. We had a couple requests as well. We'll discuss that with you, but maybe in the meantime, if we can set September 26th as the date, with the understanding we might have another meeting before then.
Excuse me, I want to, before we go further on that
Go ahead.
direction, I would like to follow up on what Dr. Bartholomew said. I actually agree with Dr. Bartholomew. I think these issues each deserve a meeting. I think they each deserve a lot of attention because those are the issues that are concerning our communities. I'm here as a citizen representative, not as a government representative, and I am hearing from people that those are the issues that are important to them. So I would like some guidance I would like people in the audience to hear from us some kind of commitment to really addressing the issues that are really bothering and giving them a lot of pause. We've heard some what I consider some extremely thoughtful comments on issues tonight from the people who have attend, and I think it's worth considering what Bob Bartholomew has proposed. And
Let me
if he
suggest
wants to
this.
make a motion and second it, I don't know if this is the appropriate time, but perhaps it is, because I don't know how we have gotten this far along the road without talking about these things, and it is the community that's bringing it forward. It's not the planning people, and it's not this committee. It's the people who are asking for this, and I think we need to respond to that.
I'll make a motion that the Airport Advisory Committee at today's meeting develop a 2019-2020 meeting schedule containing dates, agendas, and topics. This includes addressing separately the following topics: the content of the 2019 revised economic impact report, public health, and that's number one. Number two, public health such as ground and water pollution and safety. That include air pollution in that too. Number three, the effects of noise on people, wildlife, and its proposed mitigation. All of these as it relate to the 20-year Middleton Airport Master Plan. This schedule should not include the 2019-2020 holiday period from the middle of November to 2019 to the end of January 2020.
I'll second that.
Okay. Further discussion?
So you want to, just so I'm clear, not have any meetings in that 2-month time span?
Sure,
So
because
nothing,
holiday period, people are going to other places, doing other things. There's religious celebrations,
Bad
et
weather.
cetera. So, and the weather's a big deal too.
Okay. Any other discussion?
I guess I'm okay with setting a schedule, but I go places all the time. There's weather all the time. I sort of have a problem with, I know this is gonna be a slow process, removing 3 months out of the equation.
Well, there could be
Seems-
reports or whatever in the meantime, but I think for most people, it's gonna be difficult to get out during that period of time. The bad weather, you reschedule, so forth, people have other commitments, and
I think, I actually, can I just jump in for
Yeah,
just
sure.
a minute, Bob? I actually think maybe there's some maybe we could talk about that. I understand what you're saying. But I have seen in our own town the consequences of the town board making a decision directly before Christmas, and it was not a pretty meeting when they were discussing the decision that was made. And I actually tend to think that around the holidays is not a good time to have a very important talk on an important subject. So I would at least want to say, through the holiday seasons, maybe and that's much shorter, that's like a month period or a month and a half. That's much shorter than 3 months, just so that people don't feel that they've missed something because they're taking care of their families. They're being with their families. I mean, I think that's a legitimate reason to say we could maybe take a break for a month or so.
yeah, I'll accept that, sure.
I don't know.
So
It's reasonable.
I'm confused with the resolution, Bob. I heard you say that we need to cover all these things.
Yes.
and then we need to postpone the meeting.
Sure.
I see those as two separate items, two
Well,
separate issues.
No, what I'm suggesting is we revise our schedule and extend it so that we schedule meetings, separate meetings, that cover each one of those topics. So for example, shall we say, in October, discuss the content of the 2019 revised economic impact report. Okay, so maybe in early November, the public health issues.
I don't think it should just.
So to help move this along, given the hour, I have a suggestion and a comment. First of all, we have a certain scope of services that Mead and Hunt has with the Bureau, so we cannot speak for their scope of services, and we would need to obviously discuss this with them at the staff level, and we might have those detailed meetings, but we might not have Mead and Hunt available at those meetings. That might be one option. But we have other expertise if we go down that path. And then the other suggestion I have is it would be helpful if you could give us, if this fourth Thursday of the month, I think that's what this, no, this is the third Thursday.
Third Thursday.
Well, anyway, if you could say like third or fourth Thursday, whichever suits you better, is we can aim for those, and maybe do the third Thursday in November to avoid, the week before Thanksgiving, and then take a break until January. That would be helpful for us as we plan meetings and help get that on everyone's schedule. But I want to emphasize that there was a certain template, a certain schedule originally outlined based on Mead and Hunt's and the Bureau of Aeronautics work on master plans following templates in other communities. Obviously, what we've heard here tonight is a desire to take a step back and focus more on community input earlier and through the survey, and then also delve into some of these other topics which are sometimes dealt, or not sometimes, they're generally dealt more at a project level, frankly. So anyway, so we will take that guidance tonight and look at Thursdays, either the third or fourth Thursdays moving forward. And first, the focus will be the community survey, of course, as you previously voted. But we may simply just need to have a meeting to regroup and discuss the timeline with and the scope of services with Mead and Hunt, because there's not an unlimited budget here for them either.
Mark, I have a question. Sorry.
If I can,
Yeah.
real quickly, what is your schedule now? Has it always been the third Thursday?
We've been on Thursdays, but it's generally, I think we've had a second Thursday, a first Thursday, and a third Thursday, but we've been on Thursdays.
Fine, and because I know that Dan has, he has a life and a schedule too, and I know that's why he wasn't able to make this one tonight.
And you don't, and that's why you're here, or what?
That's right. I don't get any off time. But anyway, I know that it's important that you try and have them at the same. Don't try and switch them around.
That's why I'm
up at the first meeting.
That's what I'm trying to get at so I guess I'm asking, is third Thursdays or fourth Thursdays, if we move towards that, how does the group generally feel about that?
Conflict with Airport Commission.
That's on the first Thursday. We established the first Thursday for those.
Then no problem.
Works for me.
What's the third?
Recognizing
day of
that-
September and October, can we just, hold on just one second, I do.
Recognizing what Mike Frank said, that we all have our own lives and schedules and private events that we do, and sometimes people can't be
So-
present, but we can't always plan around everyone's schedule, but we can at least
So
aim.
the third Thursday of September is the 19th, and the third Thursday of October is the 17th, and the third Thursday in November
The 21st.
is the 21st,
Land use.
correct?
Really?
Okay, yeah, it's fine.
And fourth Thursdays are options too. I have to check meeting rooms and all that, so
I think I prefer
I
the
can
third
do either,
Thursday.
I think.
Okay.
Just had one other question as it relates to Bob's suggestion to go on the topics, which I like. But if it's outside of Mead and Hunt's scope and we can't revise it to include in the scope, how are we going to guarantee a topic on a meeting date that we have the appropriate experts
I
without
know.
just us talking
We're
about it?
gonna have to regroup and talk about that here. So
Okay.
I can't give you those answers tonight.
Well, some of those topics you were already scheduled for, environmental, noise, so forth. So I assume you were gonna eventually cover those anyway. Just might then pack each one of those topics into one of these meetings. Is that correct?
I guess it depends on what extent and level you want to get into some of those environmental issues. I think it's I think like Mark said, I think it's gonna be good for us to take a step back,
Okay, sure.
regroup, look at what your goals are, what you're asking us to do versus what we're scoped to do. And I think that's gonna take some time, and it's gonna impact the schedule. And I think just talking internally here, I think it's wise maybe to not necessarily think about planning another meeting until we've had a chance to regroup with the city, regroup with the Bureau of Aeronautics, and fully understand what it is you folks are wanting us to do.
So you're suspending any further meetings until we hear from you?
That would be my suggestion, to not I mean, I think let's take this back to the state, let's take it back to the city, maybe get a little greater clarification on what sort of level you want to look at some of these things. Not saying they're a bad idea at all, it's just we're not currently scoped to do some of those things, and we may not be the right firm to do some of those things. So I think taking a pause and taking a step back and reevaluating before we even talk about another meeting is probably, I would suggest, the way to go, kind of leave the meeting now.
And Bob, I think, pardon me?
I'll withdraw my motion
Okay.
in light of that.
Very good. Motion withdrawn. Any other? Yep.
Does the
Well, it's
second
just
agree?
the-
Does the
hang on a
second
minute.
agree to, you have to, the motion belongs to the body, so the second has to.
Sure.
Cynthia, you seconded it. Do you agree with the withdrawal of the motion?
Fine.
Okay.
I guess I do want to just add one thing, and that is that you don't make it, you're not going to unilaterally make a decision on what the agendas are going to be in the future until we are all talking in committee about that. Is that correct? Am I misunderstanding? You're going to make a decision and let the committee know? Because I really would like to hear, I would like people to have some guidance, the people that have been sitting here and.
Right, the focus, as we stated, and as you voted on earlier, is the next step is the community survey. And how we go about that, we're gonna discuss that internally and work that out. But that's why I agree that maybe scheduling for August would be premature.
Okay.
But the reason why I asked about your availability is if we decide it might be good for the committee to meet to discuss the survey, now at least have a meeting date that we've identified, so.
Well, I wonder though, would it be good, since there's not a meeting scheduled for August yet, to have one in August to talk about what we're talking about now, the topics, and the depth we'd like to get into, when those would occur? Could the August meeting be devoted to that?
Well, I think it'd be good to actually dig into one of those, so we aren't just meeting for the sake of having a meeting, if we're gonna do that.
Bob, I think there also has to be an understanding of, I know when you talk about environmental impact, what a master plan requires and what a action out there requires is quite different. And so I think that's kind of what Greg was alluding to a little bit. I think you may be disappointed in finding out how in-depth an environmental assessment or analysis would be through the master planning process. And I think that's part of the reason, I know Greg didn't actually put this together, but I think part of the thought was that some of these things, like the noise and some of the other environmental impact, might, from a master plan perspective, be able to be handled in one meeting.
Yeah.
Because by nature, they don't go very in depth. It's when you're actually going to build something, that's when you get into the real EIS aspect, depending on the magnitude of the project.
Well, except I would think, take noise, for example, I think a discussion would be about noise itself, decibel levels, the FAA guidelines, which again are very shaky, by the way. There's more research being done on them. How that's going to apply here, the kinds of aircraft and the sounds they create. Research that's being done, and there's also projects sponsored by FAA to correct some of those. And how is it going to be mitigated?
Right. Well, anyways, I think my point was, and still is, that I don't want you to think that, and that's something that we're going to have to clarify as a committee, get your expectations that they're here, and actually through the master planning process, we only do this.
Yeah.
I know, Leif, but I will say, and I'm gonna reiterate comments we heard tonight from the podium. Since 2016 to today, there has been a significant increase in volume and noise that is detrimentally affecting the town of Middleton, town of Springfield, and city of Middleton residents. And I think noise needs to address that. And I understand if you don't hit a certain decibel level, the FAA has no requirement. I'm tired of hearing that. We are a community, we live here, we love where we live. And we would like to see if we could update the noise mitigation plan that was voluntarily put in place in the 80s, because a lot of development has occurred since then, et cetera, et cetera.
I guess, one of the things I think about is I don't know where we're going relative. I'll just take runway length, for example. We could go through this entire process and arrive at 4,000 feet. And then we've done all this noise study and all this other stuff, and we're gonna just continue to have the airport we have.
But then we know we made the right decision.
And the next time this airport expansion is on the table again, 2 months later, 6 months later, 2 years later, we will be ready to more efficiently address it properly.
That's all I'm trying to get across is, the master plan is just a menu of opportunities. It's not anything saying this is gonna happen or that's gonna happen.
Yeah, but for who is the opportunity? Who's gonna benefit?
No, the point is, that's not my point. My point is, without knowing exactly what we're doing out there, the study of noise or the study of environmental impacts, you're just shooting at, you don't know what you're shooting at.
No,
because you
there's
don't.
already environmental impacts with leaded aviation fuel.
Right.
I think we need a baseline study.
Okay, and the point is that if we don't do anything through this master plan, Cynthia, it's still gonna be the same, it's gonna be what it's gonna be.
I understand.
Okay.
I just want to add one thing, and that is this, with respect to this discussion. Well, you can say that about anything that you're predicting in the future. How are things gonna we don't know what's gonna turn out, so we have to have one thing to fix on. Any economic development, any impacts, they're all gonna have maybe some benefits, maybe any one thing that we're gonna pick is going to have benefits and externalities. And we don't know which option to select unless we know what each of those particular options is going to have in terms of economic impacts and negative externalities. So I can't see focusing on one when there's a whole other world out there where we need that information. I think I have to disagree with you on that, Leif.
That's
all I
fine.
wanted to say.
I don't think we were focusing on one. I think what Greg had indicated is that we would definitely look at the status quo, 4,000 feet. And then we would look at maybe something other than that. And then we would do the analysis, of those two topics possibly. I don't,
Maybe I misunderstood you.
never, it doesn't matter.
It's late.
Okay,
You
it's
need a
late.
motion to adjourn?
Let's adjourn.
Let's move
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Second.